My name is Marcus, and today I'm going to tell you about the night God spoke words that would shatter every anxious thought I'd been carrying for years. Before we continue, if this story touches your heart, please subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who needs to hear that God is already working in their life. Leave a comment below telling me what you're worried about today. I read every single one. I was 32 years old, sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot at 11 o'clock at night, unable to go inside. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles had turned white. The fluorescent lights from the store entrance seemed impossibly bright, the automatic doors opening and closing like the mouth of some creature waiting to swallow me whole. I knew I was being ridiculous. I knew I just needed to walk 20 steps, grab milk and bread, and come back. But my mind had other plans. What if I run into someone from work? What if they see how tired I look? What if I forget my wallet inside and have to come back out to get it? What if the card gets declined? What if someone tries to talk to me and I can't think of anything to say? What if I pick the wrong checkout line and everyone gets frustrated waiting behind me? What if? This had become my life. A constant loop of worry that played in my head from the moment I woke up until I finally fell asleep, if I could fall asleep at all. I worked as a project manager at a mid-sized tech company called Data Stream Solutions, a job that required me to coordinate teams, meet deadlines, and solve problems daily. On paper, I was successful. I had a good salary, a nice apartment in a decent neighborhood, respect from my colleagues, even a corner office with a window. My boss, Richard, had told me just 6 months ago that I was on track for a promotion to senior project manager. But inside, I was drowning in a sea of anxiety that seemed to have no shore. It hadn't always been this way. I could remember a time, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when life felt manageable, when I could make decisions without second-guessing myself for hours, when I could attend a work meeting without spending the entire night before rehearsing what I might say, when I could accept a dinner invitation without immediately calculating all the ways it might go wrong. The change had been gradual, so gradual that I didn't notice it happening until I was already deep in it. It started small, a tightness in my chest before important presentations, a tendency to check my email 3 times to make sure I hadn't made any mistakes before sending, difficulty falling asleep on Sunday nights because I was already worrying about Monday morning. Then it grew. The tightness in my chest became a daily companion. The triple checking became quintuple checking, then constant checking. The Sunday night insomnia spread to other nights, then to most nights. And somewhere along the way, the worry that used to attach itself to specific events became a free-floating presence that attached itself to everything. Every email felt like a potential disaster waiting to happen. I would read them 5, 6, 7 times before sending, analyzing every word choice, every punctuation mark, imagining how it might be misinterpreted. Even simple messages like, "Thanks for the update," would take me 10 minutes to compose as I worried whether it sounded too casual or too formal or too dismissive or too eager. Every meeting was a minefield where I might say the wrong thing. I started keeping detailed notes on my laptop during meetings, not because I needed them for reference, but because having something to look at gave me an excuse not to make eye contact. I would mentally rehearse potential questions someone might ask me and prepare multiple versions of answers, trying to anticipate every possible direction the conversation might go. Every decision, no matter how small, felt like it carried the weight of irreversible consequences. Should I take the highway or the side streets to work? What if I choose wrong and get stuck in traffic and miss the morning stand-up? Should I order chicken or fish at the work lunch? What if I order fish and it's prepared badly and I have to eat it anyway and people notice I'm struggling? Should I wear the blue shirt or the grey shirt? What if the blue one is too casual for the client meeting I forgot about? I would spend hours lying awake at night, mentally replaying conversations from the day, analyzing every word I'd said, every expression on people's faces, searching for evidence that I'd somehow failed or disappointed someone. Did Sarah sound annoyed when I said I couldn't go to her friend's party? Did my co-worker Tom mean something else when he said my presentation was interesting? Did Richard pause too long before responding to my project proposal? What did that pause mean? The worst part was that I knew, logically, that most of my fears were irrational. I knew that people weren't scrutinizing my every word the way I scrutinize theirs. I knew that most decisions weren't actually life or death. I knew that the catastrophes I imagined rarely, if ever, came to pass. But knowing something logically and feeling it emotionally are two entirely different things. My girlfriend Sarah had noticed. How could she not? The man she'd started dating 2 years ago, confident, spontaneous, full of plans and dreams, had slowly transformed into someone who needed to know every detail of every plan days in advance. Someone who would cancel outings at the last minute because the anxiety had become too much. Someone who had stopped talking about the future because thinking about tomorrow felt overwhelming enough. We'd met at a friend's barbecue. I'd been different then. I'd walked up to her, struck up a conversation about the terrible music the host was playing, made her laugh. We'd stayed up until 3 in the morning that night, sitting on the host's back porch, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her dream of opening her own bakery. I told her about my plans to maybe start my own consulting firm someday. We'd felt limitless. Now, 2 years later, she was watching the person she'd fallen in love with disappear behind walls of worry and fear. "Marcus, you need to talk to someone," she'd said to me just 3 days before that night in the parking lot. We were sitting on my couch, the remains of takeout dinner on the coffee table between us. She'd wanted to go out to a new restaurant, but I'd convinced her to order in instead. Going out meant crowds, meant waiting, meant the possibility of things going wrong in public. "This isn't just stress," she continued, her voice gentle but firm. "This is something more. You're not sleeping. You're barely eating. You cancelled our weekend trip because you were worried about everything that could go wrong. Marcus, we were just going to drive 2 hours to the beach. That's it. But you spent 3 days making lists of everything we needed to bring, everything that could go wrong, every possible scenario you needed to prepare for, and then you just shut down." I'd nodded, promised I would look into it, but inside I was already worrying about what a therapist would think of me. Would they think I was weak? Would they judge me for not being able to handle normal adult life? Would my insurance cover it? How many sessions would I need? What if I said something in therapy that made them think I was really crazy? What if they wanted to put me on medication? What if the medication had side effects? What if people at work found out I was seeing a therapist? Would it affect my career? Would they think I couldn't handle the pressure? Would it go on some permanent record? Somewhere that would follow me forever. The worry about getting help for my worry. The irony wasn't lost on me, but that awareness didn't make it any less real. That night in the parking lot, I'd been coming home from the office after another 14-hour day. We'd been in the final push of a major project, 3 months of work, culminating in a presentation to our biggest client. I'd spent the entire day going over the presentation materials, checking and rechecking every slide, every data point, every transition. The presentation was tomorrow. I should have gone home hours ago to rest, but I couldn't stop reviewing, couldn't stop imagining all the questions they might ask, all the ways I might stumble. I hadn't eaten dinner. I'd meant to eat at the office, but I'd gotten so absorbed in my checking and rechecking that I'd worked straight through the evening. Now my stomach was empty, my head was pounding, and when I'd gotten home and opened my refrigerator, I'd found it almost bare. Some old takeout containers, a half-empty jar of pickles, nothing that constituted actual food. I needed groceries. Simple. The store was 3 minutes away. I could be in and out in 10 minutes. Simple. Except nothing felt simple anymore. I'd driven to the store on autopilot, parked in a spot near the entrance, and then I'd sat there, and sat there, and sat there. The parking lot was moderately busy for 11 o'clock at night. I watched people come and go. A family with 2 young children, the kids clearly tired and cranky, the parents moving with the practiced efficiency of people who just needed to get home. An elderly couple moving slowly with their cart, the man pushing while the woman checked items off a list. A group of college-aged kids laughing together as they loaded cases of soda into their trunk. A woman in scrubs who looked like she'd just finished a long shift at the hospital, grabbing what were probably essentials before heading home. They all seemed to move through the world with an ease I couldn't remember ever having. How did they do it? How did they just exist? Without this constant static of fear and anticipation running through their minds. What secret did they know that I didn't? Or was I the only one? Was I uniquely broken? Was there something fundamentally wrong with me that made me incapable of handling the basic tasks of being alive? 45 minutes passed, 45 minutes of sitting in my car, staring at a grocery store entrance, unable to make myself move. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself I was just tired. I told myself I'd go in a minute. I told myself I was being smart, waiting until the store was less crowded. But I knew the truth. I was paralyzed, completely and utterly paralyzed by a tangle of fears and worries that made no logical sense but felt absolutely real. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Did you make it home okay? Call me when you can. Love you." I stared at those 3 words. Love you. She loved me, this broken, anxious, barely functioning version of who I used to be. This person who couldn't even walk into a grocery store without having a breakdown. This person who had disappointed her again and again, cancelling plans, avoiding her friends, shutting down conversations about the future because the present was already too much to handle. And what was I giving her in return? Cancelled plans and distant conversations and a boyfriend who couldn't even accomplish the simple task of feeding himself. She deserved so much better. She deserved someone who could take her to dinner without having a panic attack. Someone who could meet her friends without spending 3 days worrying about it. Someone who could talk about getting married, having kids, building a life together, without feeling like the floor was dropping out from under him. I thought about the man I used to be, or maybe the man I thought I was going to be. When I was 25, fresh out of graduate school, starting my career, I'd had plans. I was going to travel. I was going to take risks. I was going to build something meaningful. I was going to be someone who made a difference. Now I was 32, sitting in a parking lot at midnight, unable to buy milk and bread. Something broke inside me in that moment, not in a dramatic way, not like in the movies where someone hits rock bottom and has a sudden revelation accompanied by swelling music and perfect lighting. It was quieter than that, sadder than that. More like a whisper that said, "This can't be all there is. This can't be how the rest of my life goes. I can't spend the next 40 years like this. I can't. I won't survive it." I bowed my head against the steering wheel, my forehead pressing against the cool leather. And I did something I hadn't done in months. I prayed. I'd grown up going to church. My parents had taken me every Sunday until I left for college. I'd even been involved in youth group, had gone on mission trips, had that phase in high school where I was really into my faith. But somewhere in my 20s, church had become another thing on the list, another obligation, another place where I felt like I had to perform. So I'd stopped going, stopped praying, stopped thinking about God except in abstract, philosophical ways. But in that moment, I had nowhere else to turn, no strategy left to try, no solution I could engineer. I was at the end of myself. So I prayed, not a formal prayer, not the kind I'd learned in church as a kid with these and thous and proper religious language, just raw, desperate honesty spoken into the darkness of my car. God, I don't even know if you're listening. I don't even know if you're real, to be honest. I haven't thought about you in a long time. I haven't talked to you in longer. And I don't know if you care about something as small and pathetic as a guy who can't walk into a grocery store. You probably have bigger things to worry about. Wars and famines and people with real problems. But I'm so tired. I'm so tired. I'm tired of being afraid all the time. I'm tired of worrying about everything. I'm tired of feeling like I'm failing at life when I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I have a good job. I have a woman who loves me. I should be happy. I should be grateful, But I can't feel anything except this weight, this constant pressure, this voice in my head that never stops telling me everything that could go wrong. If you're real, if you're there, if you actually care, I need you to help me. Because I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. Please, I don't know what else to say, just please. The parking lot was quiet. A car drove by slowly, its headlights sweeping across my windshield like a searchlight. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of traffic on the main road, the hum of the store's refrigeration units, the mechanical swoosh of the automatic doors, all the ambient noise of late-night suburban life. Nothing dramatic happened. No angelic choir suddenly filled my car. No bright light shone down from heaven. No voice boomed from the clouds. Just me, sitting in my car, feeling embarrassed and exposed and a little bit ridiculous that I'd just poured out my heart to someone who probably wasn't even listening. I felt stupid. I felt childish. I felt like I'd just regressed to some primitive, superstitious version of myself that believed in magical thinking and divine intervention. But then, in the silence that followed, something shifted. I felt something. Not a voice exactly, not words I could hear with my ears, but a presence, a knowing, something that existed beyond my thoughts but somehow communicated directly to them. It was like someone had stepped into the car with me, even though I was completely alone. A gentle pressure in my chest that felt like warmth spreading through cold water. A sense of being seen, truly seen, in a way I hadn't felt in years. And with that presence came words, not spoken aloud, not heard through my ears, but received somehow directly into the deepest part of me, below thought, below emotion, in that place where you just know things. While you worry, I am already acting. I lifted my head from the steering wheel, my eyes wet with tears. I hadn't realized I'd been crying. My heart was pounding, but not from anxiety this time, from something else, something I didn't have a name for. While you worry, I'm already acting. What did that mean? I looked around the parking lot, as if the answer might be written somewhere in the rows of cars, the shopping carts lined up near the entrance, the glowing store windows. The store was still there. Its doors were still opening and closing. People were still shopping. Nothing had changed externally. The world looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago. But inside me, something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in months, maybe years, the constant static in my mind had quieted, not disappeared. I could still feel the anxiety there, like a distant hum, like background noise from another room, but it had lost its grip on me. It had stopped being the loudest voice in my head. In its place was something I couldn't quite name. Peace? No, not exactly. It wasn't that simple. More like space, room to breathe. A sense that for just this moment, I didn't have to figure everything out. I didn't have to solve every problem. I didn't have to anticipate every possible outcome. While I was worrying, God was acting. While I was lying awake replaying conversations, He was working. While I was paralyzed with fear about the future, He was preparing it. While I was convinced everything was falling apart, He was holding everything together. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, took a deep breath that felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months, and opened my car door. The night air was cool on my face, carrying with it the smell of rain that might be coming, the faint scent of someone's wood-burning fireplace from a nearby house. I stood up, my legs a little shaky, and closed the car door behind me. The sound seemed loud in the quiet parking lot. I walked toward the store entrance. One step, then another, then another. The automatic doors sensed my approach and opened with their mechanical swoosh. I walked through. Inside, the fluorescent lights were just lights. Bright, yes, but not threatening. The other shoppers were just people, tired people buying food. The aisles were just aisles, organized and labeled and mundane. I grabbed a basket, its red plastic handle cool under my palm, and walked to the dairy section. The refrigerator cases hummed softly. I opened one and felt the blast of cold air on my face. I picked up a gallon of milk, checked the expiration date out of habit, and placed it in my basket. Then I walked to the bread aisle. The store was playing soft instrumental music that I hadn't noticed before. I chose a loaf of whole wheat bread, the same kind I always bought. I added it to my basket. As I walked to the checkout, I realized I was doing it. I was actually doing it. The thing that had felt impossible 45 minutes ago was happening. And yes, my heart was still beating faster than normal. And yes, I was still aware of the other people around me. And yes, part of my brain was still trying to worry about whether I'd forgotten something, or whether the cashier would judge my minimal purchase, or whether I'd fumble with my wallet. But those thoughts felt distant now, manageable, like clouds passing across the sky rather than the sky itself. There were 3 checkout lanes open. I chose one with a young cashier who looked tired but friendly. I waited behind one other customer, a man buying cat food and paper towels. When it was my turn, I placed my items on the conveyor belt. "How are you tonight?" the cashier asked, scanning my milk. "Better than I was an hour ago," I said. And it was true. She smiled. "That's good to hear. That'll be 8.47. I pulled out my card. My hand was steady. I inserted it into the reader. It processed. It didn't decline. The machine beeped. I took my card back. The cashier bagged my items and handed them to me. "Have a good night," she said. "You too," I replied. As I walked back to my car with my small bag of groceries, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not triumph, exactly. Not victory. Nothing so dramatic. Just a quiet sense that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone in this as I thought I was. That maybe there was something bigger than me, something beyond me, that was working even when I couldn't see it. Even when I couldn't feel it, even when I was convinced I was doing everything alone. I sat in my car before driving home, the bag of groceries on the passenger seat beside me, the milk already starting to sweat condensation in the warm car. I thought about those words again. While you worry, I am already acting. What had God been doing while I'd been paralyzed with fear in this parking lot? What had he been preparing while I'd been lying awake at night replaying every conversation? What doors had he been opening while I'd been convinced everything was falling apart? What connections had he been making? What people had he been moving? What circumstances had he been arranging? I didn't have answers. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something that felt almost like hope. Not the naive kind that pretends problems don't exist. Not the fragile kind that shatters at the first sign of difficulty, but the deeper kind, the kind that whispers that maybe there's more going on than what I can see with my anxious, worried eyes. The kind that suggests that maybe my worry isn't the most important force in my life, that maybe there's a bigger story being written than the one I'm frantically trying to control. I started my car and drove home, the familiar streets looking somehow different in the late-night darkness. When I got there, I carried my groceries inside, put the milk in the refrigerator, left the bread on the counter, and then I called Sarah. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said, her voice warm with relief, but also with a question. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, and for the first time in months, it felt true. Not completely true. The anxiety was still there. The worry hadn't vanished, but something had shifted, something had changed. "Yeah, I think I am. Can we talk tomorrow? I have something I need to tell you." "Of course. I love you, Marcus." "I love you too." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my apartment, in the living room with its familiar furniture and its piles of work papers, and its evidence of a life that had been slowly shrinking. The anxiety was still there. I could feel it coiled in my chest, ready to spring back to life with its questions and fears and catastrophic predictions. The worry hadn't vanished. My problems hadn't disappeared, but something had changed. Something had begun. A crack had formed in the wall of fear and worry I'd been living behind, and through that crack, light was beginning to seep in. Those words kept echoing in my mind, like a promise I was just beginning to understand, like a truth I was just beginning to believe. While you worry, I'm already acting. The next morning, I woke up at 6:30 to the sound of my alarm, which was unusual because I typically woke up at 5, jolted awake by anxiety before the alarm even had a chance to sound. For a moment I lay there in bed, disoriented by the simple fact that I'd actually slept. Not perfectly, not dreamlessly, but I'd slept. The morning light was filtering through my bedroom curtains, casting soft shadows across the ceiling. I could hear the distant sound of traffic building on the main road, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog, the hum of my refrigerator from the kitchen. Normal sounds, morning sounds, the world continuing its rotation like it did every day. I thought about last night, about sitting in my car in that parking lot, about the prayer I'd whispered into the darkness, about the words that had come back to me, "While you worry, I am already acting." In the harsh light of morning, part of me wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to exhaustion, to desperation, to my mind playing tricks on me when I was at my lowest point. That's what the rational part of my brain was trying to tell me. You were just stressed. You were having a breakdown. You imagined it because you needed to imagine it. But I couldn't quite convince myself of that, because something had shifted. The anxiety was still there. I could feel it starting to build as I thought about the day ahead, about the client presentation that was happening in just a few hours. But it felt different somehow, less totalizing, like it was a part of my experience rather than the entirety of it. I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The loaf of bread I'd bought last night was still sitting on the counter. The milk was in the refrigerator. Simple things. Evidence that I'd actually done something I'd been unable to do for 45 minutes. Evidence that something had changed, even if I didn't fully understand what. I made coffee, which was part of my morning routine, but this time I didn't spend 20 minutes worrying about whether I'd measured the grounds correctly, or whether the coffee maker was going to malfunction, or whether I should have bought a different brand of beans. I just made coffee. And when it was done, I poured myself a cup and sat at my small kitchen table, looking out the window at the morning. My phone was on the table in front of me. I'd promised Sarah we would talk today. I picked it up, hesitated for just a moment, then called her. She answered quickly. "Marcus, is everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I know it's early. I'm sorry. I wanted to talk to you before I went into work. It's fine. I've been up since 6. "What's going on? You sounded different last night." I took a sip of coffee, trying to figure out how to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that you think God spoke to you in a grocery store parking lot? How do you explain an experience that sounds irrational even to your own ears? "Something happened last night," I began. "After I left work, I stopped at the grocery store to get some food, and I couldn't go inside. I sat in my car for almost an hour, Sarah. Just sat there, unable to walk through the doors, and I realized that I can't keep living like this. I can't keep letting the anxiety control everything." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Marcus, I'm so glad you're realizing that. I've been so worried about you. I know you have been, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the times I've canceled plans, all the times I've shut down, all the times I've made you feel like you're not important to me. You are. You're so important to me, but I've been drowning and I didn't know how to ask for help." "So what changed last night?" she asked gently. I took a breath. I prayed. I know that probably sounds strange. I haven't prayed in years, but I was sitting in that parking lot and I didn't know what else to do, so I asked God for help, and I felt something, or heard something. Not with my ears, but I don't know how to explain it. But I felt like God told me, "While you worry, I am already acting." I waited for her response, half expecting her to be skeptical, to think I was having some kind of breakdown. But Sarah had always been more spiritually open than I was. She'd grown up in a family that actually practiced their faith, not just the performative Sunday church attendance I'd experienced. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "And it makes sense, doesn't it? We spend so much time trying to control everything, trying to anticipate every problem, trying to manage every outcome. But what if God is already working on things we can't even see yet?" "That's what I've been thinking about all morning," I admitted. "I have this huge presentation today, 3 months of work all coming down to one meeting, and normally I'd be a complete wreck right now. I'd have been awake since 4 in the morning, going over everything again and again, imagining every way it could go wrong. But right now, I'm still nervous, but it's not consuming me. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense. So, what are you going to do? I think I need to actually get help. Real help. I need to find a therapist. I need to stop pretending I can manage this on my own. And I think I need to start going back to church. Not because I think it'll magically fix everything, but because, I don't know, because I felt something last night that I haven't felt in a long time. Like there's something bigger than me, bigger than my anxiety, bigger than all the things I'm trying to control. I think that's really brave, Sarah said, and I'll support you however I can. Do you want me to help you look for a therapist? Would you? Of course. I'll start researching some options today. We'll find someone good, someone who understands anxiety. And Marcus, I'm really proud of you. Those words hit me harder than I expected. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of me? When was the last time I'd done something worth being proud of, beyond just surviving? Thank you, I managed. I should probably get ready for work. Big day. You're going to do great. And remember what God told you. While you're worrying, He's already acting. Maybe He's already been preparing this presentation to go better than you think. We said our goodbyes, and I sat there for a moment longer, my coffee cooling in my hands. The presentation, right. The thing I'd been obsessing over for weeks. The meeting that had consumed my thoughts for the past 3 months. Today, Richard and I were presenting to Meridian Technologies, our biggest client. They were considering expanding their contract with us, which would mean more revenue, more resources, more opportunities. It was important, really important, the kind of meeting that could define the next year of my career. And normally, I would have been absolutely paralyzed by that importance. I would have spent every waking moment between now and the meeting running through every possible scenario, every potential question, every way I might stumble or fail. I would have arrived at the office hours early, reviewed my notes dozens of times, rehearsed my talking points until they sounded robotic. But sitting there at my kitchen table, I felt something different. Not confidence exactly, not the absence of nerves, but a strange sense of release. Like the outcome wasn't entirely dependent on my performance, like there were forces at work beyond just my preparation and anxiety. While you worry, I am already acting. Oh, what if God was already working on this presentation? What if the outcome was already being shaped by things I couldn't see, couldn't control, couldn't anticipate? What if my worry was actually the least important factor in all of this? It was a radical thought for someone who'd spent years believing that his constant vigilance was the only thing standing between success and catastrophe. I finished my coffee, got dressed, and headed to the office. The drive that normally took 25 minutes of careful navigation and constant second-guessing, every lane change, felt almost peaceful. I even turned on the radio, something I hadn't done in months because the noise felt like too much stimulation on top of the noise already in my head. When I arrived at DataStream Solutions, the parking lot was already half full. 7:45. The early birds were already at their desks, caffeinated and ready to tackle the day. I grabbed my laptop bag from the passenger seat and headed inside. The office was one of those modern tech spaces, open floor plan, standing desks, a ping-pong table in the break room that no one actually used, motivational posters about innovation and synergy on the walls. My office was on the second floor, a corner space with a window that looked out over the parking lot. It wasn't huge, but it was mine, and it had a door I could close when I needed to. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, another small decision that felt significant. Normally, I would have taken the elevator to avoid running into co-workers in the stairwell, avoid the small talk, avoid the possibility of saying something awkward. But today, I took the stairs. On the second floor landing, I ran into Tom, one of the senior developers on my team. Tom was in his late 40s, had been with the company for 8 years, and had the kind of easygoing personality that made everyone like him instantly. "Marcus, big day today, huh?" he said, holding the door open for me. "Yeah, big day," I agreed. "You ready? You've been working like crazy on this presentation. It's going to be great." Normally, I would have deflected. I would have said something self-deprecating, would have listed all the things that could go wrong, would have turned his confidence into another source of pressure. But instead, I just smiled. "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that." He looked a little surprised but pleased. "Well, good luck. We're all rooting for you." I got to my office, set down my bag, and booted up my computer. The presentation file was already on my desktop, where it had been living for the past 3 months. I opened it, not to review it again, but just to make sure it was there, ready to go. 3 months of work, dozens of slides, charts and graphs and projections, customer testimonials, case studies, our proposal for expanding services. Everything we needed to convince Meridian Technologies that we were worth the investment. I'd built this presentation from the ground up. I'd researched every data point. I'd crafted every sentence. I'd chosen every image. I'd rehearsed it so many times, I could probably deliver it in my sleep, and yet for the past 3 months, I'd been convinced it wasn't good enough, that I'd missed something, that I'd made some critical error that would only become apparent when we were standing in front of the client. But looking at it now, I realized something. It was actually good, really good. I'd done good work. And whether or not Meridian Technologies agreed, whether or not they expanded their contract, I'd done everything I could do. I'd given it my best effort. The rest wasn't up to me. While you worry, I'm already acting. Maybe God had been working on this presentation all along. Maybe he'd been guiding my research, my design choices, my words. Maybe he'd been preparing the people at Meridian Technologies to hear what we had to say. Maybe he'd been arranging circumstances I couldn't even see. Maybe, and this was the hardest part to accept, maybe the outcome was going to be exactly what it needed to be, regardless of how much I worried about it. At 9:30, Richard stopped by my office. He was in his mid-50s, had run the project management division for 6 years, and had the kind of calm, assured presence that made you feel like everything was under control, even when it wasn't. "Morning, Marcus. How are you feeling?" "Good," I said, and realized it was true. "Surprisingly good, actually." He raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's a change from yesterday. You looked like you were about to have a panic attack every time I walked by your office." I laughed, a genuine laugh. "Yeah, yesterday wasn't my best day, but I'm feeling better today." "Good, because this presentation is solid. You've done excellent work. I've been reviewing it all week, and honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. You should be confident going in there. Should be confident." The old Marcus would have heard that as pressure, as an expectation he needed to meet, as another way he could fail. But today, I heard it differently. As affirmation, as recognition that I'd already done the work, that the preparation was complete. "Thanks, Richard. That means a lot." "The meeting's at 2. Meridian's team is coming here. We'll use the big conference room. It'll be you, me, and probably 3 or 4 people from their side. Standard stuff. We'll do the presentation, take questions, and see where we land. Sound good?" "Sounds good." He left, and I spent the rest of the morning doing something I hadn't done in months. I worked on other things. I answered emails. I checked in with my team about their current projects. I reviewed timelines and budgets for other clients. I did my job instead of obsessing over the one meeting that had consumed all my mental energy for weeks. At noon, I went to lunch with a couple of co-workers, Jennifer and David from the design team. Normally, I would have eaten alone at my desk, too anxious to make small talk, too preoccupied with work to relax. But today, when Jennifer stopped by my office and asked if I wanted to join them, I said yes. We went to a sandwich shop 2 blocks away. We talked about normal things, Jennifer's daughter's soccer tournament, David's plans to renovate his kitchen. The new coffee machine the company had installed in the break room. Simple, human conversations that had nothing to do with work or presentations or anxiety. "You seem different today, Marcus," Jennifer observed as we walked back to the office. "More relaxed." "I guess I am," I admitted. "I had kind of a revelation last night." "Oh yeah? What kind of revelation?" I considered how to answer. "Just that I need to stop trying to control everything. That worry doesn't actually help anything. That maybe I need to trust that things will work out the way they're supposed to." David nodded. "That's profound, man. I struggle with that too, wanting to control everything. It's exhausting." "It really is," I agreed. Back at the office, I had 2 hours before the meeting. 2 hours that used to feel like an eternity of nervous anticipation. But today, I used them productively. I finished a report that was due next week. I called a client to check in on their satisfaction with our services. I organized my desk, which had become cluttered with papers and sticky notes and half-empty coffee cups. At 1:45, I headed to the conference room. It was the big one, with the long table and the good chairs and the presentation screen at the front. Richard was already there, setting up his laptop, getting everything ready. "You good?" he asked when I walked in. "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." And I was. My heart was beating a little faster. My palms were slightly sweaty. But it wasn't the overwhelming, paralyzing anxiety I'd expected. It was just normal nervousness, the kind that every person feels before something important, the kind that sharpens your focus rather than destroying it. The Meridian Technologies team arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. 4 people: Karen, their Chief Technology Officer; Michael, their Director of Operations; Lisa, a Senior Project Manager; and James, who Karen introduced as a strategic consultant they'd brought in to help evaluate vendors. We made small talk while everyone got settled. Karen mentioned the traffic. Michael complimented our office space. Lisa asked about the coffee. James reviewed his notes. Normal pre-meeting stuff. Richard gave the opening remarks, thanking them for their time, reviewing the agenda, setting the stage. Then he turned it over to me. I stood up, moved to the front of the room, and advanced to the first slide. And then I did something I'd never done before in a high-stakes presentation. I took a breath, looked at the people in front of me, and didn't immediately launch into my rehearsed script. Instead, I spoke from something deeper than preparation. "Thank you all for being here today," I began. "For the past 3 months, our team has been working on what we believe is a comprehensive proposal for expanding our partnership. But before we get into the details, I want to acknowledge something. We know you have options. We know you could work with any number of firms, and we're grateful that you've given us the opportunity to show you why we believe we're the right fit for what you're trying to accomplish." It wasn't in my script. It wasn't in my notes. It was just honest, and I could see in their faces that it landed differently than a typical corporate presentation opening. I moved through the slides, but I wasn't just reciting information. I was telling a story, the story of our partnership so far, the story of what we'd learned about their needs, the story of where we saw the opportunity to grow together. I referenced the data, the charts, the projections, but I didn't hide behind them. I used them to support a narrative about partnership and shared success. I could feel something happening in the room, an engagement, an interest. These weren't just 4 people sitting through another vendor presentation. They were actually listening, actually considering. When I got to the section about our proposed expansion, new services, additional support, integrated systems, I watched Michael lean forward slightly. I saw Lisa take notes. I noticed Karen exchange a glance with James that seemed positive. I wasn't imagining it. The presentation was working. "While you worry, I am already acting." The words came back to me as I advanced through the final slides. All those weeks of obsessive preparation, all those sleepless nights, all that worry about whether it would be good enough. And here I was, in the actual moment, and it was unfolding exactly as it needed to. Not because I'd controlled every variable, not because my anxiety had somehow protected me from failure, but because the work was good, and I was capable, and something bigger than me was at work in this room. I finished the presentation and opened it up for questions. They had good questions, smart, probing questions that showed they'd been paying attention, questions about implementation timelines and cost structures and technical specifications. Richard fielded some of them. I handled others. We worked as a team, complementing each other, covering all the angles. After 45 minutes of discussion, Karen called for a break. "This has been really helpful," she said. "I think we need to step out for a few minutes and confer among ourselves. Would that be all right?" "Of course," Richard said. "Take all the time you need. We'll be right here." The four of them left the conference room, and suddenly it was just Richard and me. He looked at me with something like amazement. "Marcus, that was incredible. I've never seen you present like that. You were confident, clear, engaging. Where did that come from?" I thought about the parking lot, about the prayer, about the words I'd received in the darkness of my car. "I guess I just realized that I'd already done everything I could do," I said. "The rest isn't up to me." Richard smiled. "Well, whatever shifted in you, hold on to it, because that's the Marcus I've always known was in there somewhere." We waited. 10 minutes, then 15, then 20. I could feel the old anxiety starting to creep back in. They were taking a long time. Was that good or bad? Were they debating? Were they finding problems with our proposal? Were they— "While you worry, I am already acting." I closed my eyes for just a moment and breathed. Whatever they were discussing out there, I couldn't control it. The presentation was over, the work was done. Now it was time to trust. At 3:15, the door opened and the Meridian team came back in. Karen was smiling. "We've had a good conversation," she said, sitting back down. "And I want to be direct with you. We came into this meeting with some hesitation. We've been evaluating several options for expanding our vendor relationships, but what you presented today, both the substance and the way you presented it, has addressed many of our concerns." My heart was pounding, but not from anxiety, from anticipation. "We'd like to move forward with the expanded contract," Karen continued. "Obviously, there are details to work out, legal terms to finalize, timelines to establish. But in principle, we're ready to commit to the partnership you've outlined." Richard was professional enough to maintain his composure, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "That's excellent news, Karen. We're thrilled to deepen our partnership with Meridian." They shook hands. There was more discussion about next steps, about who would handle what pieces of the contract negotiation, about when we'd schedule follow-up meetings. But the essential thing had happened. We'd won the contract. When they finally left, Richard turned to me and laughed, a genuine, delighted laugh. "We did it. Marcus, we actually did it. Do you know how big this is?" I did. I knew exactly how big it was. It was 3 months of work validated. It was career advancement. It was resources and opportunities and proof that we could deliver at the highest level. It was huge. But more than that, it was something else. It was evidence of something I was just beginning to understand. While I'd been worrying about every slide, every word, every possible outcome, God had been acting. He'd been preparing that room. He'd been arranging circumstances. He'd been working in ways I couldn't see and couldn't control. And the presentation had succeeded, not because my worry had somehow prevented disaster, but in spite of my worry. Maybe even because I'd finally let go of some of that worry and trusted that there was something bigger at work. I thought about last night, sitting in that parking lot, unable to buy groceries. And I thought about today, standing in front of our biggest client, delivering the presentation of my career. 24 hours. That's all it had been. 24 hours since I'd prayed that desperate prayer. 24 hours since I'd heard those words, and already things were different. Not perfect, not completely healed. I could still feel the anxiety there, lurking at the edges of my mind, ready to spring back into full force if I let it. But I'd proven something to myself today. I'd proven that I could function, not just function, but excel, without letting the anxiety control me. While you worry, I am already acting. As I left the office that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Gratitude, not just relief that the presentation had gone well, not just satisfaction with the outcome, but genuine gratitude that I was learning to trust something bigger than my own desperate attempts to control everything. I called Sarah from the car. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "We got the contract," I said. She screamed with delight. "Marcus, that's amazing! I'm so proud of you." "Thank you." "But Sarah, that's not even the best part. The best part is that I didn't fall apart. I was nervous, but I wasn't paralyzed. I trusted that it would work out the way it was supposed to, and it did." "That's what faith looks like," she said softly. "Not the absence of fear, but trusting anyway." As I drove home, the evening sun casting long shadows across the road, I thought about what came next. I still needed to find a therapist. I still needed to do the work of actually addressing my anxiety in a real, sustained way. This wasn't a magic cure. This wasn't an instant transformation. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall I'd been living behind, a glimpse of what life could be like if I learned to trust that while I worried, God was already acting. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The weekend after the Meridian presentation felt like waking up from a long, exhausting dream. Saturday morning, I slept until 8:30. Not because my alarm woke me, not because anxiety jolted me awake, but because my body had finally decided it was time to get up. I couldn't remember the last time that had happened. Sarah came over around 10 with coffee and bagels from the place near her apartment that she'd been trying to get me to visit for months. Every time she'd suggested it, I'd found a reason not to go. Too crowded, too far, too unpredictable. But today, when she arrived with the bag of food and that hopeful smile on her face, I realized how much my anxiety had stolen from both of us. "I got you the everything bagel with cream cheese," she said, setting the bag on my kitchen counter. "And I might have also gotten you one of those chocolate croissants you pretend you don't love." I laughed. "I don't pretend. I openly love them." "Then why haven't we been to this place together in over a year?" The question hung in the air between us. Not accusatory, just honest. I pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down, and she sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Because I was scared," I admitted. "Because going to a new place meant too many variables. What if we couldn't find parking? What if it was too crowded? What if we had to wait in line? What if I ordered the wrong thing? What if? I've been living in a cage made of what-ifs, Sarah. And I've been dragging you into that cage with me." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You haven't been dragging me anywhere. I chose to stay. I chose you, even when things got hard. But I'm so glad you're starting to see a way out." We ate our breakfast, and for the first time in months, food actually tasted like something other than obligation. The bagel was perfect, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, the cream cheese tangy and rich. The croissant was buttery and sweet, simple pleasures that I'd been too anxious to enjoy. "So," Sarah said, pulling out her phone, "I did some research like I promised. I found 3 therapists who specialize in anxiety disorders. All of them have good reviews, all of them take your insurance, and all of them have openings in the next 2 weeks. She showed me her notes, detailed, organized, color-coded. This was Sarah at her best, taking care of the people she loved through practical action. I looked at the names, the credentials, the brief descriptions she'd written about each one. Dr. Patricia Chen, cognitive behavioral therapy specialist, 20 years experience, office 15 minutes from your apartment. Robert Martinez, LMFT, focuses on anxiety and relationship impacts, offers evening appointments. Dr. James Morrison integrates mindfulness practices, has a waiting list, but can see you next Monday. "These are all great," I said. "Thank you for doing this. So which one do you want to try first?" I looked at the 3 names again, and for a moment the old anxiety tried to creep back in. What if I choose wrong? What if I pick someone who doesn't understand? What if I waste time and money on the wrong therapist? What if, "While you worry, I am already acting"? The words came back to me like a lifeline. I took a breath. "Dr. Chen," I said, "let's start with her. If she specializes in CBT, that seems like a good evidence-based approach. And 15 minutes from my apartment means I won't have an excuse not to go. Sarah smiled. I'll call her office on Monday and get you set up. Thank you. Seriously. I know I don't say it enough, but thank you for not giving up on me. I love you, Marcus. And I'm watching you fight for yourself, fight for us. That means everything. After breakfast, we did something we hadn't done in over a year. We went for a walk. Just a simple walk through the neighborhood. No destination in mind, no agenda. We walked past houses with gardens full of late spring flowers. We walked past a playground where children were climbing on monkey bars and swinging on swings. We walked past a small park where an elderly man was throwing a tennis ball for his enthusiastic golden retriever. The world felt different, or maybe I felt different in the world. The anxiety was still there. I felt it spike when a car backfired nearby, felt it tighten when we passed a group of teenagers being loud and rowdy, but it didn't control me. It didn't send me running back to the safety of my apartment. It was just there, an uncomfortable companion, but not the dictator of my choices. Can I ask you something? Sarah said as we sat down on a bench overlooking a small pond. Of course. What made you pray that night? In the parking lot. You haven't talked about God or faith in all the time I've known you. What changed? I watched a duck glide across the water, leaving ripples in its wake. I think I ran out of options. I'd tried everything else, or at least everything my anxious brain would let me try. I'd tried working harder, thinking harder, controlling harder, and none of it worked. I just kept getting worse. So in that moment, when I was completely out of my own solutions, I turned to something I'd abandoned years ago. And God answered. Yeah, not in the way I expected. I didn't hear a voice from the clouds, but I felt something. And I heard those words in my mind, in my heart, wherever it is that we hear truth that's deeper than just thoughts. While you worry, I am already acting. And it was like someone turned on a light in a dark room. I could suddenly see that all my worry was just me trying to control things I was never meant to control. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, I grew up going to church every Sunday. My parents are still really involved in their congregation, but I kind of drifted away when I went to college. Not because I stopped believing, but because it felt like one more obligation, you know. But lately I've been thinking maybe I need to reconnect with that part of myself. Would you want to try going to church together? I asked. I've been thinking about the same thing. Not to fix everything or because I think it's magic, but because I felt something real that night, and I want to understand it better. I'd like that, she said. There's a church about 20 minutes from here that my friend Rachel goes to. She's always said it's welcoming, not judgmental. We could try it tomorrow. Tomorrow, Sunday, church. A year ago, the thought would have sent me into a spiral. What if I don't know when to stand or sit? What if everyone there is super religious and I feel like a fraud? What if they ask me to do something I'm not ready for? What if people try to talk to me and I don't know what to say? But today, I just nodded. Yeah, let's try it. That evening, after Sarah left, I did something I hadn't done since college. I opened the Bible app on my phone. I didn't even remember downloading it, but it was there, buried in a folder with other apps I'd abandoned. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where to start, so I just searched for the word worry. The results filled my screen, dozens of verses, hundreds of references. Apparently, I wasn't the first person in human history to struggle with anxiety. One verse stood out from Matthew. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. I read it 3 times, letting the words sink in. Each day has enough trouble of its own. That was true, wasn't it? I'd been trying to solve tomorrow's problems today, next week's problems this week, next year's problems this month. I'd been trying to live multiple timelines simultaneously, and it was tearing me apart. Another verse from Philippians. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Present your requests to God. That's what I'd done in the parking lot, wasn't it? not with fancy language or proper theology, just raw, desperate honesty. And something had shifted. I kept reading, getting lost in passages about peace and trust and faith. Some of it felt foreign to me, like a language I'd once known but forgotten, but some of it felt like water to someone dying of thirst. Sunday morning came too quickly. I woke up at 7, and for a moment, the old anxiety was there in full force. Church, people, small talk, unknown expectations. What if... But then I remembered, while you worry, I'm already acting. I got dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt, not too formal, not too casual, somewhere in the middle that felt safe. Sarah picked me up at 9:15. She looked beautiful in a simple sundress, her hair pulled back, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. "Ready?" she asked when I got in the car. "As ready as I'll ever be." The church was called Grace Community, and it met in a converted warehouse in a mixed-use neighborhood about 25 minutes from my apartment. As we pulled into the parking lot, I could see people streaming toward the entrance, families with kids, elderly couples, young professionals, people of all ages and backgrounds. It felt less intimidating than I'd feared. Inside, the space was simple, but warm. Rows of chairs instead of pews. A small stage at the front with instruments and microphones. Natural light coming through industrial windows. It didn't feel like the formal, stuffy churches I remembered from childhood. It felt human. We found seats toward the back, my preference, so I could see everyone and have an easy exit if I needed it. Sarah squeezed my hand as we sat down, and I realized my palms were sweating. A woman about our age sat down next to Sarah. "First time here?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Yeah," Sarah said. "Our friend Rachel recommended it." "Oh, you know Rachel. She's great. Welcome. I'm Jennifer." "I'm Sarah, and this is Marcus." Jennifer shook both our hands. "Well, you picked a good Sunday to visit. Pastor Mike is starting a new series today about finding peace in chaos. Should be good." The service started with music. Not the traditional hymns I remembered, but contemporary songs with guitars and drums and a level of energy that surprised me. Some people had their hands raised, others were singing along, some were just standing quietly. Nobody seemed to care what anyone else was doing. There was a freedom to it that felt different from the performative church of my childhood. Then Pastor Mike took the stage. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, wearing jeans and a casual shirt. He didn't stand behind a pulpit. He just talked to us like we were having a conversation. "How many of you woke up this morning with your mind already racing about everything you have to do this week?" he began. "Raise your hand. Be honest." About half the room raised their hands, including me. "Yeah, me too," he said with a laugh. "I woke up thinking about this sermon, about the meeting I have tomorrow, about the weird noise my car is making, about whether I remembered to pay the electric bill." Our brains are incredible at finding things to worry about, aren't they? There was knowing laughter throughout the room. I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. "Today we're starting a series called Peace in the Storm," Pastor Mike continued. "And we're going to talk about what it means to trust God when life feels overwhelming, not in some abstract theoretical way, but in the practical day-to-day reality of being human in a complicated world." Nhayat, for the next 40 minutes, he talked about anxiety, fear, and worry, not as spiritual failures, but as human experiences that even Jesus' closest followers dealt with. He talked about how faith doesn't mean the absence of fear, but rather knowing you're not alone in the fear. He referenced scripture, but he also referenced psychology, neuroscience, real stories from his own life. At one point, he said something that hit me like a physical force. What if your worry is actually getting in the way of the work God is already doing in your life? What if, while you're frantically trying to control everything, God is already acting, already moving, already preparing solutions you can't even imagine yet? I felt Sarah's hand find mine. She'd heard it too, those words. The same message I'd received in the parking lot, now being spoken from a stage to a room full of people who apparently needed to hear it as much as I did. "God isn't waiting for you to get your act together," Pastor Mike continued. He isn't waiting for you to stop worrying before he starts working. He's already at work, right now, in your life, in your circumstances, in ways you can see and in ways you can't. Your job isn't to control everything. Your job is to trust that he's got this. Daitum. When the service ended, people started moving toward the exits, but some lingered to talk. Jennifer introduced us to a few others, Mark and his wife Christina, a couple who'd been attending for a few years. David, a guy about my age who worked in tech. Amy, a grad student who was new to the area. "So what do you think?" Mark asked. "It was good," I said honestly. "Different from what I expected." "Yeah, Mike has a way of making things real," Mark said. "No religious jargon, no judgment. Just honest talk about faith and life." We talked for a few more minutes. Normal conversation about work, the weather, weekend plans. Nobody asked invasive questions about why we were there or what we believed. They were just friendly, welcoming, human. As Sarah and I walked back to her car, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not certainty. I still had so many questions, so many doubts, but something like hope. Hope that maybe there was a community of people who understood struggle. Hope that maybe faith didn't mean pretending everything was fine. Hope that maybe I could learn to trust something bigger than my own anxious thoughts. "That was really good," Sarah said as we drove home. "Do you want to go back next week?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I do." That afternoon, I found myself thinking about the concept of trust. What did it actually mean to trust God? I'd spent so much of my life trusting only myself, my preparation, my vigilance, my constant mental simulations of every possible scenario. And where had that gotten me? Exhausted, paralyzed, unable to even buy groceries without a breakdown. What if trust meant something different? Not blind faith that ignored reality, but a deeper confidence that there were forces at work beyond my control. Forces that were actually working for my good rather than against me. I thought about the presentation. I'd prepared for months, worried constantly, convinced that any small mistake would lead to disaster. But in the end, what had made the difference? Not my worry, not my obsessive reviewing, but my willingness to show up, do my best, and trust that the outcome would be what it was supposed to be. Monday morning, Sarah called Dr. Chen's office and made an appointment for me. Wednesday at 4 o'clock, 2 days away. I felt the familiar anxiety spike at the thought. What will I even say? What if she thinks I'm beyond help? What if therapy doesn't work for me? But I let the thoughts come, and then let them go, like clouds passing across the sky. Tuesday at work, Richard stopped by my office. "Marcus, I wanted to let you know that the executive team heard about the Meridian win. They're really impressed. And they want to talk to you about that senior project manager position. Interested? A promotion. The thing I'd been working toward for years. The thing I'd convinced myself I wasn't ready for, wasn't good enough for, would somehow fail at, if given the chance." "Yeah," I said. "I'm definitely interested." "Good. We'll set up a meeting for next week, but between you and me, I think it's yours if you want it. You've proven yourself, not just with Meridian, but with your leadership, your work quality, your growth. You've earned this." After he left, I sat at my desk and let his words sink in. You've earned this, not through perfect performance, not through anxiety-driven obsession, but through showing up, doing good work, and learning, slowly, painfully, to trust. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to Dr. Chen's office. It was in a professional building, 3rd floor, with a small waiting room that had comfortable chairs and soft lighting and magazines nobody reads. I checked in with the receptionist, filled out some paperwork, and waited. At exactly 4 o'clock, a woman in her 50s with short grey hair and kind eyes opened the door to the waiting room. "Marcus." I stood up, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment I'd been avoiding for months. The moment of admitting out loud that I needed help. "I'm Dr. Chen, please come in." Her office was small but comfortable. A couch, 2 chairs, a desk with minimal clutter, some plants by the window. She gestured to the couch, and I sat down, suddenly aware of how nervous I was. "So," she said, sitting in one of the chairs across from me, "tell me what brings you in today." I took a breath. "I have anxiety. Bad anxiety. It's been getting worse for years, and it's affecting everything. My work, my relationship, my ability to function. I've been avoiding getting help because I was anxious about getting help. But last week, something happened that made me realize I can't keep living like this." "What happened last week?" I told her about the parking lot, about sitting in my car, unable to buy groceries, about the prayer, about the words I'd heard. I told her about the presentation, about starting to attend church again, about beginning to understand that my worry wasn't protecting me, it was imprisoning me. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, but mostly just being present. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "Marcus, thank you for sharing that. It takes a lot of courage to acknowledge that you need help, and it sounds like you've already started making some important changes." "I have, but I don't know if I can sustain them. I'm afraid this is just a temporary reprieve, and the anxiety is going to come roaring back." "It might," she said honestly. "Recovery isn't linear. There will be good days and bad days. But what I'm hearing is that you've had an experience that shifted your perspective. You've begun to see that there might be another way to live. And that's actually the most important first step." We talked for the rest of the hour about cognitive behavioral therapy, about the connection between thoughts and feelings and behaviors, about practical strategies for managing anxiety. She explained how our brains can get stuck in patterns of catastrophic thinking, how we can learn to challenge those thoughts, how we can practice new ways of responding to anxiety. "I'd like to see you weekly for the first month," she said as our session ended. "We'll work on identifying your triggers, developing coping strategies, and building your capacity to tolerate uncertainty. Because ultimately, that's what anxiety is, an inability to tolerate the uncertainty of life." As I drove home from that first therapy session, I thought about what she'd said, an inability to tolerate uncertainty. That was exactly right. I'd been trying to eliminate all uncertainty from my life, trying to anticipate and control every possible outcome. And it was impossible. Life was inherently uncertain. The question wasn't how to eliminate uncertainty, but how to live with it. While you worry, I'm already acting. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe trusting God wasn't about knowing exactly how everything would turn out. Maybe it was about believing that while I couldn't see the future, couldn't control every outcome, couldn't prevent every problem, God was already at work in ways I couldn't imagine. That evening I called my parents for the first time in 3 weeks. We had a good relationship, but I'd been avoiding them lately because I knew my mom would hear the stress in my voice and worry, and I didn't want to deal with her worry on top of my own. "Marcus," my mom answered, "we were just talking about you. How are you?" "I'm good, Mom. Actually, I'm really good. Some things have been changing for me lately, and I wanted to tell you about them." I told them about the therapy, about going to church, about the spiritual experience in the parking lot. My mom cried. She'd been praying for me, she said, praying that I'd find my way back to faith, praying that I'd get help for the anxiety she'd seen consuming me. "While you were worrying about me, God was already working," I told her, and I heard the sharp intake of breath as she recognized the truth in those words. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about how much had changed in 1 week. 7 days ago, I'd been sitting in a parking lot, paralyzed and desperate. Now I had a therapist. I had a church community starting to form. I had a promotion on the horizon. I had a girlfriend who was seeing the man she'd fallen in love with starting to emerge from behind the walls of anxiety. 7 days, 1 week, not enough time to solve everything, not enough time to be healed, but enough time to begin. Enough time to prove that change was possible. Enough time to learn that while I worried, God was already acting. And that was enough. The next 3 weeks became a rhythm of small victories and familiar setbacks. Therapy with Dr. Chen every Wednesday at 4, church with Sarah every Sunday morning, work days that oscillated between confidence and crippling self-doubt. Slowly, I was learning that recovery wasn't a straight line from broken to healed. It was more like a spiral, circling the same issues at different levels, gradually moving upward even when it felt like I was going in circles. On a Thursday afternoon in early June, Richard called me into his office for the meeting about the senior project manager position. I'd known it was coming, had been preparing for it in my own way, which meant I'd spent probably too much time rehearsing what I might say, imagining various scenarios, trying to anticipate every possible question. But as I walked down the hallway to his office, I caught myself. I paused outside his door, took a breath and thought, while you worry, I am already acting. God had already been preparing this moment. The outcome was already in motion. My job wasn't to control it. It was to show up authentically and trust. I knocked and Richard called me in. He was sitting at his desk with Margaret, the VP of Operations, a sharp woman in her early 60s who'd been with the company for 15 years and had a reputation for being tough but fair. "Marcus, come in, sit down," Richard said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Margaret smiled at me, one of those professional smiles that could mean anything. "So," Richard began, "I'm sure you know why we asked you here. After the Meridian success and looking at your overall performance over the past 2 years, we think you're ready for the senior project manager role." I felt a surge of something, relief, pride, anxiety, all mixed together. "However," Margaret added, and my stomach dropped slightly, "we want to be honest with you about what this position entails. It's not just more of what you're already doing. It's a significant increase in responsibility. You'd be managing not just projects, but other project managers. You'd be involved in strategic planning, client relations at a higher level, budget oversight for the entire department. It's a lot. We've seen you handle pressure," Richard continued, "but we've also noticed that sometimes you seem overwhelmed. We want to make sure you're in a place where you can take this on without burning out." There it was, the truth I'd been trying to hide. They'd noticed. Of course they'd noticed. You can't spend months barely holding yourself together and expect nobody to see it. A month ago, this conversation would have sent me into a spiral. I would have heard it as criticism, as evidence that I wasn't good enough, as confirmation of my worst fears about myself. I would have either defensively insisted I was fine or immediately disqualified myself from consideration. But today, sitting in that office, I made a different choice. I decided to be honest. "You're right," I said. "I have been overwhelmed. For the past year, maybe longer, I've been dealing with severe anxiety. It got to the point where I could barely function. I was working long hours, but not actually being productive. I was so worried about making mistakes that I was paralyzed." Margaret and Richard exchanged a glance. I couldn't quite read it. "But 3 weeks ago," I continued, "I hit a breaking point, and I made a decision to actually get help. I started seeing a therapist. I'm working on strategies to manage the anxiety in healthier ways. I'm not going to pretend I'm completely better. I'm not. But I'm actively working on it, and I'm already seeing improvement." There was a moment of silence. Then Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, thank you for being honest with us. That takes courage, and frankly, it makes me more confident in offering you this position, not less." I blinked. "Really? Really?" she said. "Do you know how many people in leadership positions are secretly struggling with anxiety, depression, burnout, and they never say anything? They just white-knuckle their way through until they crash. The fact that you recognize the problem and sought help shows self-awareness and maturity that a lot of people never develop." Richard nodded. "We're not looking for someone who's perfect. We're looking for someone who's capable, who delivers results, and who's honest about their limitations. You check all those boxes. So, the position is yours if you want it," Margaret said. "The promotion would be effective July 1st. That gives you a few more weeks to continue working with your therapist to make sure you feel ready. What do you think?" I thought about the parking lot, about the prayer, about the words that had changed everything. I thought about Dr. Chen telling me that recovery wasn't linear. I thought about Pastor Mike saying that God wasn't waiting for me to get my act together before he started working. I want it, I said, and I appreciate you giving me the time to prepare. I won't let you down. We know you won't, Richard said, extending his hand. I shook it, then shook Margaret's hand. As I walked out of that office, I felt something unfamiliar. I felt like I deserved this. Not because I was perfect, not because I'd hidden all my flaws, but because I'd done good work and I was willing to be honest about my struggles. That evening at therapy, I told Dr. Chen about the meeting. How did it feel to be honest with them? She asked. Terrifying at first, I admitted, but then liberating, like I didn't have to pretend anymore. And they responded better than I expected. They actually respected the honesty. That's a significant breakthrough, Marcus. Vulnerability often gives us more strength than hiding does. When we pretend to be fine, we exhaust ourselves, maintaining the facade. When we're honest, we free up that energy for actual healing and growth. We spent the rest of the session working on what she called anxiety exposure, deliberately putting myself in situations that made me uncomfortable, not to prove I could conquer them, but to practice tolerating the discomfort without it controlling me. Next week, she said, I want you to try something. I want you to go to that bagel place with Sarah, the one you've been avoiding. Not because you have to prove anything, but because you deserve to enjoy simple pleasures without anxiety stealing them from you. The assignment felt both simple and impossible, but I agreed to try. Saturday morning, I called Sarah. Want to go to that bagel place today? The one you've been wanting to take me to. There was a pause, then, really? Are you sure? I'm sure. Well, I'm nervous, but I'm sure. We met there at 10:30. The place was called Goldberg's Bagels, and it was exactly as Sarah had described. Crowded, busy, chaotic in the way that popular breakfast spots always are. Every table was full. There was a line of about 8 people waiting to order. The noise level was high, conversations overlapping, the espresso machine hissing, plates clattering, someone's baby crying. A year ago, I would have taken one look through the window and walked away. 6 months ago, I might have tried to go in, but would have had a panic attack and had to leave. 3 weeks ago, I would have been paralyzed in the parking lot, like I'd been at the grocery store. But today, I walked in with Sarah's hand in mine, and I stayed. Yes. My heart was racing. Yes, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. Yes, my brain was offering helpful suggestions like, everyone is looking at you, and you're going to order wrong, and you don't belong here. But I stayed. We got in line. We looked at the menu board together. When it was our turn, I ordered an everything bagel with lox and cream cheese. The person taking my order didn't judge me. They just wrote it down and asked if I wanted anything to drink. We found a small table in the corner. Sarah had the instinct to grab it before someone else did, and we sat down with our number placard, waiting for our food. "You okay?" Sarah asked quietly. "I'm anxious," I said honestly. "But I'm here. That's something. That's everything," she corrected. Our food came, and we ate, and gradually I realized something. Nobody was paying attention to me. Everyone was absorbed in their own conversations, their own meals, their own lives. The world didn't revolve around my anxiety. Most people weren't even aware I existed, much less judging me for being there. It was oddly freeing. "This bagel is incredible," I said, and Sarah laughed. "I've been telling you that for 2 years. We stayed for over an hour, just talking, people watching, enjoying the simple pleasure of being out in the world together. When we finally left, I felt tired. Managing anxiety is exhausting, even when you're doing it successfully. But I also felt proud. I'd done something hard, and I'd survived it. Sunday at church, Pastor Mike continued his series on peace in the storm. This week's topic was about the difference between worry and wisdom, between anxiety and appropriate caution. Worry is rehearsing the future in your mind, over and over, imagining every possible way things could go wrong, he said. Wisdom is acknowledging risks, making reasonable preparations, and then trusting God with the outcome. Worry keeps you stuck. Wisdom moves you forward. I thought about all the hours I'd spent rehearsing presentations, replaying conversations, imagining disasters that never happened. All that time and energy poured into worry that accomplished nothing except making me miserable. The question isn't whether you'll face uncertainty, Pastor Mike continued. The question is whether you'll face it alone, or with the knowledge that God is with you, working in ways you can't see. You have a choice. You can exhaust yourself trying to control everything, or you can do your part and trust God with the rest. After the service, Sarah and I joined the young adults group that met in a room down the hall. There were about 15 people there, ranging from early 20s to late 30s. Jennifer, the woman who'd welcomed us our first week, was facilitating. Today we're talking about fear, she said. What are you afraid of? What keeps you up at night? And how does faith help or not help with those fears? People started sharing. Sarah talked about her fear of failure, of investing everything into opening her bakery someday and having it fall apart. A guy named Ethan talked about his fear of never finding someone to share his life with. A woman named Priya talked about her fear that she'd chosen the wrong career path and wasted years of her life. When it came around to me, I hesitated. But then I thought about being honest with Richard and Margaret, about how vulnerability had actually strengthened me rather than weakening me. I'm Marcus, I said. This is my 3rd week here, and I struggle with severe anxiety, like clinical level, need therapy, can't function sometimes anxiety. For years, I've been afraid of everything, afraid of failing, afraid of disappointing people, afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of the future. And 3 weeks ago, I hit rock bottom. I was sitting in a parking lot, unable to walk into a grocery store, and I prayed for the first time in years. And I felt like God told me, while you worry, I am already acting. And that's been changing my perspective, not fixing everything, but helping me see that maybe my worry isn't the most important force in my life, that maybe God is already at work in ways I can't see. There were nods around the room, understanding faces. A few people came up to me after the discussion to say they struggled with anxiety too, to thank me for sharing, to ask about my therapist. It turned out I wasn't alone, not even close. Over the next week, I noticed something shifting in how I approached my work. I was still diligent, still thorough, still committed to doing quality work. But I wasn't obsessing. I wasn't checking and rechecking emails 10 times before sending them. I wasn't lying awake mentally rehearsing conversations. I was doing my work, doing it well, and then releasing it. On Wednesday, Dr. Chen asked me to describe the difference. It's like I struggled to find the words. It's like I used to believe that my worry was what made me successful, that if I wasn't anxious, I wouldn't be careful, that my anxiety was actually protecting me from making mistakes. But now I'm starting to see that worry and diligence aren't the same thing. I can be thorough without being tormented. I can be careful without being controlled by fear. That's a profound insight, she said. The anxiety has been lying to you, telling you it's your friend, your protector, but really, it's been your prison warden. She introduced me to a new technique that week, the worry window. Instead of trying to never worry, which was impossible, I could designate a specific 15-minute period each day where I was allowed to worry about anything and everything. Outside that window, when worries came up, I could acknowledge them and say, I'll think about that during my worry window. It sounded simplistic, but I tried it. Every day at 7 p.m., I sat down with a notebook and spent 15 minutes writing out all my worries. What surprised me was how much harder it was to sustain the worry when I was doing it intentionally. When worry was a constant background hum, it felt endless and overwhelming. But when I tried to focus on it for 15 solid minutes, I often ran out of things to worry about after 8 or 9 minutes. The worries were still there, but they were losing their power. On Friday, Richard pulled me aside. Margaret and I have been talking. We want to start transitioning you into the senior role a little early. Nothing official yet. You'll still get the promotion and pay increase on July 1st. but we'd like you to start sitting in on some of the strategic planning meetings, getting a feel for what the role entails. You up for that?" "Yeah," I said, "I'm ready." And surprisingly, I meant it. Not because I felt perfectly confident, not because I had eliminated all anxiety, but because I was learning that being ready didn't mean being without fear. It meant being willing to move forward despite the fear. That weekend, Sarah and I went hiking. It was her idea. She'd been wanting to get out into nature, and there was a trail about 45 minutes outside the city that she'd heard good things about. Normally, I would have found reasons to avoid it. What if we get lost? What if the weather turns bad? What if I'm not in good enough shape? What if there are bugs or snakes or dangerous wildlife? But I said yes. The trail was beautiful, winding through forests and along a ridge that offered views of the valley below. It was moderately challenging, enough to get my heart rate up, but not so difficult that I felt overwhelmed. We hiked for 2 hours, talking some, but also just being quiet together, listening to the sounds of birds and wind through trees. At the top of the ridge, we stopped to rest on a large flat rock. The view stretched for miles, rolling hills, patches of forest, a small town in the distance, the sky vast and blue above us. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah said. "Of course. I feel like I'm getting my boyfriend back, the person I fell in love with. These past few weeks I've watched you come back to life, and it's been incredible to witness." I took her hand. "I'm sorry for the year I put you through, for all the cancelled plans, all the times I shut down, all the ways I let anxiety steal our relationship. You don't have to apologize. You were struggling, you were doing the best you could, and now you're fighting for yourself, for us, for the life you want. That's what matters." We sat there for a long time, just breathing, being present, not worrying about what came next. On the hike back down, I thought about how different this would have been 6 months ago. I would have spent the entire hike anxious about getting back to the car, about what I needed to do when I got home, about work on Monday. I would have been physically present but mentally absent, unable to enjoy the moment because I was too busy worrying about the future. But today, I was here, really here, present in my own life in a way I hadn't been in years. That evening, I sat down and wrote in the journal Dr. Chen had encouraged me to keep. I wrote about the hike, about the bagel place, about the promotion, about church, about all the small and large ways my life was changing, and then I wrote, "I'm starting to understand what, while you worry, I am already acting really means. It doesn't mean I'll never struggle. It doesn't mean anxiety will disappear. It means that while I'm caught up in my fears about the future, God is already at work in that future, preparing things I can't see, arranging circumstances I can't imagine, working for my good in ways I'll only understand when I look back. My job isn't to figure everything out. My job is to trust, to do the next right thing, and to believe that I'm not navigating life alone." I closed the journal and looked around my apartment. Same furniture, same layout, same view out the window. Nothing had changed externally, but internally everything was different. 3 weeks ago, I'd been trapped in a parking lot, unable to complete a simple errand. Today, I'd hiked a mountain. I'd accepted a promotion. I'd shared vulnerably with strangers at church. I'd eaten at a crowded restaurant. I'd started therapy. I'd reconnected with my faith. 3 weeks. Not enough time to be healed. Not enough time to have everything figured out, but enough time to prove that change was possible. Enough time to see that while I'd been worrying, God had already been acting. Monday morning, I walked into my first strategic planning meeting as a soon-to-be senior project manager. The room was full of people at higher levels than I'd normally interact with, VPs, directors, senior leadership. A year ago, I would have been paralyzed with anxiety about being in that room. 6 months ago, I would have forced myself through it while having a panic attack. 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't have been there at all. But today, I walked in, took a seat, and participated. I offered ideas when I had them. I asked questions when I was confused. I listened and learned. And when the meeting was over, nobody pulled me aside to tell me I'd embarrassed myself or didn't belong there. Because I did belong there, not because I was perfect, not because I never struggled, but because I was capable, and I was willing to grow, and I was learning, slowly, imperfectly, to trust that while I worried about whether I was enough, God was already confirming that I was. That night before bed, I prayed. Not a desperate parking lot prayer this time, just a conversation, a thank you, an acknowledgement that I was still learning, still struggling, still anxious sometimes, but that I was moving forward. That change was happening. That hope was real. "Thank you for meeting me in that parking lot," I whispered into the darkness of my bedroom. "Thank you for those words. Thank you for showing me that while I worry, you're already acting. Help me remember that tomorrow, and the day after, and every day that comes after that." And in the quiet that followed, I felt that same presence I'd felt 3 weeks ago. Not a voice, not words, just a knowing, a peace that went deeper than my circumstances. A reminder that I wasn't alone, wasn't abandoned, wasn't walking through this life without help. While I worried, God was acting, and that truth was beginning to change everything. July 1st arrived with the kind of summer heat that makes you remember why air conditioning was invented. It was also the day my promotion became official, Senior Project Manager, a title that came with more responsibility, higher pay, and a nagging voice in my head that kept asking, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I'd been working with Dr. Chen for 6 weeks now, and one of the things she'd taught me was to recognize that voice for what it was, anxiety disguised as prudence. It wasn't wisdom asking if I was ready. It was fear trying to convince me I wasn't. The difference, she'd explained in our session earlier that week, is that wisdom asks, "What do I need to do to prepare?" while anxiety asks, "What if I'm not good enough?" One question moves you forward, the other keeps you stuck. So when that voice showed up on July 1st, I acknowledged it. Thanks for sharing. And then I got to work. My first official task as Senior Project Manager was to lead a team meeting with the 4 project managers who now reported to me. Tom was one of them, which felt strange since we'd been peers for years. The other 3 were Jennifer from the design team, Carlos, who handled client relations, and Amanda, who specialized in technical implementations. I'd prepared for the meeting, but not obsessively. I had an agenda, some points I wanted to cover, questions I wanted to ask them, but I wasn't trying to anticipate every possible thing that might go wrong. I was just prepared, reasonably, appropriately prepared. The meeting was at 9. I got there at 8:45, set up the conference room, pulled up my notes on the screen. At 9 exactly, they all filed in. "Morning, everyone," I said as they took their seats. "First, I want to say thank you for being here. I know this is a transition for all of us. I was your peer, now I'm your manager. That might feel weird for a while, and that's okay. My goal isn't to micromanage or change everything you're doing. You're all excellent at your jobs. My role is to support you, remove obstacles, and help coordinate our efforts across projects." I saw Tom smile. Jennifer nodded. Carlos and Amanda were taking notes. "I want to start by hearing from each of you. What's working well in your current projects? What challenges are you facing? What do you need from me to be successful?" For the next hour, we talked. Really talked. Not a status update meeting where everyone just reports numbers and moves on, but an actual conversation about the work, about what was hard, about what they needed. Tom mentioned that he was struggling with a client who kept changing requirements. Jennifer talked about resource constraints on the design side. Carlos raised concerns about a timeline that felt unrealistic. Amanda asked if we could standardize some of our technical processes to reduce redundancy. I listened, took notes, asked clarifying questions. And then I said, "Okay, here's what I'm hearing. Tom, I'll set up a meeting with that client to help establish clearer boundaries around scope. Jennifer, I'll talk to Margaret about getting you another designer for that project. Carlos, Let's look at that timeline together tomorrow and see if we can negotiate a more reasonable deadline. And Amanda, I love the idea about standardizing processes. Can you put together a proposal for what that might look like? They all looked a little surprised, I think, that I'd actually heard them and was taking action on what they'd shared. But that's what I would have wanted when I was in their position. A manager who listened and helped, rather than one who just demanded results. As the meeting ended and everyone filed out, Tom hung back. "Marcus," he said, "that was really good. I mean it. You're going to be great at this." "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. And I know this is maybe weird to say, but you seem different, more relaxed, more present. Whatever you've been doing the past few weeks, it's working." I thought about the parking lot, about therapy, about church, about all the small choices I'd been making to face my anxiety rather than let it control me. "Yeah," I said, "I'm working on some things, getting help for some stuff I should have addressed a long time ago." "Well, keep doing it, because this version of Marcus is the one I always knew was in there." That afternoon, I had lunch with Sarah at a small cafe near her apartment. She'd taken the day off from her job at the marketing firm where she'd been working for the past 4 years. A job she was good at but didn't love. A job that was paying the bills while she saved up to pursue her real dream of opening a bakery. "So, senior project manager," she said, raising her iced tea and a mock toast. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying and exciting in equal measure," I admitted, "but more exciting than terrifying, which is new for me." "I'm so proud of you, Marcus, really." "How are you doing?" I asked. "We've been talking so much about my stuff lately. What's going on with you?" She was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea with her straw. Then, "I've been thinking a lot about the bakery, about whether I'm ever actually going to do it, or if I'm just going to keep saying someday until I'm 60. What's holding you back?" "Fear, mostly. What if I invest everything and it fails? What if I'm not actually good enough? What if I make this huge leap and discover I hate running a business? What if, I said gently. "I know that loop. I've lived in that loop. So how do you get out of it?" I thought about Pastor Mike's sermon, about Dr. Chen's techniques, about the words that had changed everything for me. "You don't eliminate the fear," I said. "You just stop letting it make all your decisions. You acknowledge it. You prepare as best you can, and then you trust that even if things don't go perfectly, you'll figure it out, and you remember that God might already be acting in ways you can't see yet." She smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just learning. Slowly, very slowly." "Well, I appreciate the reminder. Maybe it's time for me to actually put together a business plan. Stop talking about it and start doing something about it." "I'll help however I can," I offered. "I know you will. That's one of the reasons I love you." That evening, I went to church for the Wednesday night service, something I'd started attending in addition to Sunday mornings. It was smaller, more informal, just about 40 people gathered in one of the side rooms. Tonight's topic was about waiting on God's timing. Pastor Mike started by reading a passage from Isaiah. "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Waiting is one of the hardest things we're asked to do, he said. We live in a culture of instant gratification. We want answers now, solutions now, results now. But God's timing is rarely our timing. And learning to wait, really wait, not just impatiently endure, is a crucial part of faith. I thought about all the times I'd been anxious because I couldn't see what was coming next, couldn't control the timeline, couldn't make things happen faster. My anxiety had been, in many ways, an inability to wait, an insistence on knowing now, controlling now, fixing now. But here's what's beautiful about waiting on God, Pastor Mike continued. Waiting doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something is happening that you can't see yet. While you're waiting, God is preparing you. He's arranging circumstances. He's working in other people's lives that will intersect with yours. Waiting isn't wasted time, it's preparation time. While you worry, I am already acting. The same message, said a different way. While I was anxiously waiting for something to happen, God was already working. The waiting itself was part of the work. After the service, I stayed for the prayer time. It was optional, just a space for people who wanted to pray together or ask for prayer. I'd never stayed before. It felt too vulnerable, too intimate. But tonight, I felt drawn to it. There were maybe 10 of us gathered in a circle. Pastor Mike asked if anyone had prayer requests. A woman I didn't know raised her hand. "I'm going through a divorce. It's been really hard. I could use prayer for peace and wisdom." "Absolutely," Pastor Mike said, and several people made notes to remember to pray for her. An older man spoke up. "My daughter is struggling with addiction. We don't know how to help her anymore. Just pray for her, for all of us." There were tears in his eyes. Someone reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Then it was quiet. And before I could talk myself out of it, I spoke. "I'm Marcus. I've been coming here for about 6 weeks. I struggle with severe anxiety, and I'm learning to trust God instead of trying to control everything. But some days are harder than others. I could use prayer for continued healing and for trusting God's timing." "Thank you for sharing that, Marcus," Pastor Mike said. "We'll absolutely pray for you." And then we prayed. Not fancy, formal prayers. Just honest conversations with God, people speaking out loud about these needs, asking for help, expressing faith that God was listening and caring and acting even when we couldn't see it. When someone prayed specifically for me, a woman named Carol, who I'd never formally met, I felt tears on my face. She prayed that God would continue the healing he'd started, that he would give me courage to keep facing my fears, that I would learn more and more to trust his timing and his provision. It was one of the most vulnerable moments of my life, and also one of the most healing. As I drove home that night, I thought about community. For years, I'd isolated myself with my anxiety. I'd convinced myself that nobody would understand, that I had to handle it alone, that asking for help was weakness. But what I was discovering was that isolation made everything worse. Community, therapy with Dr. Chen, church with Sarah, and this group of people I was getting to know, honest conversations with colleagues at work, was where healing actually happened. I wasn't meant to carry this alone. None of us were. The next week brought its first real test of my new role. One of Carlos's clients, a major account worth significant revenue, was threatening to leave. They'd had a series of problems with their project, some of which were our fault, and some of which were their own unrealistic expectations. Carlos had been trying to manage it, but it had escalated to the point where they wanted to speak with someone at a higher level. As the senior project manager, that someone was now me. Richard pulled me aside Thursday morning. "Marcus, I know you just stepped into this role, but I need you to handle the Westfield account situation. They're meeting with us tomorrow at 2. Carlos will be there, but they want to hear from leadership that we're taking their concerns seriously." Old Marcus would have spent the next 24 hours spiraling. What if I can't fix it? What if they're so angry they won't listen? What if I say the wrong thing and make it worse? What if we lose the account and it's my fault? But I'd been practicing the techniques Dr. Chen taught me, so instead of spiraling, I made a plan. First, I called Carlos and asked him to walk me through the entire situation, not just the problems, but the history, the relationship, what he'd already tried. I listened without judgment, took detailed notes. Then I looked at the actual data. What had we promised? What had we delivered? Where had we fallen short? What were reasonable fixes? Finally, I prepared for the meeting, not by rehearsing every possible scenario, but by clarifying my goals, listen to their concerns, acknowledge what we'd done wrong, propose concrete solutions, rebuild trust. That evening at therapy, I told Dr. Chen about the situation. "How are you feeling about it?" she asked. "Nervous," I admitted, "but not paralyzed. I've done what I can to prepare. Now I just have to show up and do my best." "That's exactly right. And what will you do if they decide to leave anyway?" "Be disappointed, learn from it, move forward." She smiled. "You've come a long way, Marcus. 2 months ago, you would have said something like, 'It'll be the end of my career,' or I'll have failed everyone. She was right. The catastrophizing had quieted, not disappeared. I could still feel it lurking at the edges of my thoughts, but it wasn't running the show anymore. Friday at 2, I walked into the conference room where Carlos and I were meeting with the Westfield team, their CEO, Mark, and their operations director, Rachel. Both looked tense. I opened by being direct. Mark, Rachel, thank you for taking this meeting. I know you're frustrated with how things have gone, and I want to start by saying you have every right to be. We've fallen short in some areas, and I'm here to listen to your concerns and figure out how we make this right. Mark seemed a bit surprised by the directness. Well, I appreciate that. We've been working with DataStream for 3 years, and this past project has been a disaster from the start. For the next 30 minutes, he and Rachel detailed everything that had gone wrong. Some of it was legitimate. We'd missed deadlines. We'd had communication breakdowns. We'd delivered work that wasn't up to our usual standards. Some of it was unrealistic expectations on their part, scope changes without timeline adjustments, demands for features that hadn't been in the original contract, frustration with things outside our control. I listened. I took notes. I asked clarifying questions. I didn't get defensive or make excuses. I acknowledged what was our fault and gently pushed back on what wasn't. Then I said, here's what I'm proposing. First, for everything we got wrong, the missed deadlines, the quality issues, we're going to make it right at no additional cost. Carlos and his team will work with you to get everything to where it should have been from the start. Second, I'm personally going to be involved in this project going forward. Weekly check-ins with you both. Direct line to me if issues come up. Third, let's talk about the scope and timeline for the remaining work. I think there's been some miscommunication about what was included in the original contract, and I want us to get aligned on realistic expectations. Mark and Rachel exchanged a glance. Then Mark said, that's more than I expected you to offer. I thought you were going to tell us why we were wrong about everything. You're not wrong about everything, I said. You're our client. You trusted us with important work, and we didn't deliver the way we should have. Our job now is to rebuild that trust. We spent another hour working through the details, clarifying scope, adjusting timelines, establishing better communication protocols. By the end of the meeting, Mark was actually smiling. All right, he said, let's give this another shot. But Marcus, I'm holding you to those weekly check-ins. You have my word, I said. After they left, Carlos looked at me with something like awe. How did you do that? They came in ready to fire us and you completely turned it around. I just listened, I said, and I took responsibility for what was ours to own, and I offered real solutions instead of excuses. But what I didn't tell Carlos, what I was only beginning to understand myself, was that I'd been able to do that because I wasn't drowning in anxiety about the outcome. A month ago, I would have been so terrified of losing the account that I would have either been defensive or overly apologetic. But today, I'd been able to be honest, clear, and focused on solving the problem rather than managing my fear. While you worry, I'm already acting. God had been preparing me for this moment, not just by calming my anxiety, but by teaching me that my worth wasn't dependent on perfect performance, that I could handle hard conversations. That failure wasn't the end of the world, that trust could be rebuilt, that I was more capable than my anxiety had ever let me believe. That weekend, Sarah and I attended a one-day business workshop she'd found about starting a small business. It was at a community college about 30 minutes away, 6 hours of instruction on business plans, financing, marketing, legal structures, all the practical stuff you need to know before opening a bakery. I watched Sarah take notes furiously, ask smart questions, connect with other people who were also thinking about starting businesses. I watched her come alive in a way I rarely saw at her current job. During lunch break, we sat outside on a bench. You're really going to do this, aren't you? I said. I think I am. I mean, not tomorrow. I need to save more money, put together a solid plan, find the right location. But yes, I'm going to do this. I'm proud of you. You inspired me, you know. Watching you face your anxiety, get help, make changes in your life. It made me realize I was letting fear keep me from my dream. If you can face your fears, I can face mine. That night, as we drove home, Sarah said something that caught me off guard. "Marcus, I've been thinking. We've been together for 2 years. We've been through a lot, some of it really hard, but we came through it. And I love you. I love who you are, who you're becoming. I'm not saying we need to do anything about this right now, but I can see a future with you. Marriage, kids, building a life together. And I wanted you to know that." My first instinct was panic. Marriage? Kids? Those were huge, life-altering decisions with 1,000 variables and countless ways things could go wrong. My anxiety immediately offered helpful suggestions about everything that could fail. But then I thought about the parking lot, about the words, about learning to trust. "I can see that future too," I said. "And that terrifies me if I'm honest, but it also feels right. You've been there for me through my worst. You've loved me when I wasn't very lovable. You've believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I don't know exactly what our timeline looks like, but I know I want to walk through life with you." She reached over and took my hand. And we drove home in comfortable silence, 2 people learning to build a life together, despite their fears, because of their faith, and in trust that while we worried about the future, God was already there, already acting, already preparing the way. Sunday morning at church, Pastor Mike finished his series on peace in the storm. The final message was about surrender. "We think surrender means giving up," he said. "But actually, surrender means giving over, giving your worries over to God, giving your need for control over to God, giving your timeline over to God. It doesn't mean you don't do your part. It means you do your part, and then you trust God with the outcome." As I sat there, Sarah's hand in mine, I thought about everything that had changed in 2 months. The promotion, the client meeting, Sarah's business dreams, our conversation about the future, all of it scary, all of it uncertain, all of it requiring me to trust in ways I never had before. But I was learning, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and struggles. I was learning that I didn't have to have everything figured out. I was learning that while I worried, God was acting. And I was learning that surrender wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of freedom. "While you worry, I am already acting." 2 months ago, those words had been a revelation in a dark parking lot. Today, they were becoming a way of life. August arrived with the kind of heat that makes you move slower, think slower, exist slower. 3 months had passed since that night in the parking lot. 3 months of therapy, church, small victories, occasional setbacks, and gradual transformation. I was learning that healing wasn't a destination you arrived at. It was a direction you traveled in. My sessions with Dr. Chen had evolved. We were no longer just managing crisis mode anxiety. Now we were working on the deeper patterns, the beliefs about myself that had fed the anxiety for years, the need for perfection, the fear of disappointing others, the conviction that my worth was tied to my performance. "Tell me about your childhood," she'd said in our session last week, which is such a therapist cliché that I'd actually laughed. "Are we really doing this?" I'd asked. "We really are, because the anxiety you experience now has roots. It didn't just appear out of nowhere." So I'd told her about growing up as an only child with parents who loved me, but had high expectations. My dad, an engineer, who believed there was a right way and a wrong way to do everything. My mom, a teacher, who praised achievement but rarely comfort. Neither of them were bad parents. They'd given me everything I needed, supported my education, been proud of my successes. But somewhere along the way, I'd internalized the message that love was earned through performance, that approval came from getting things right, that mistakes were evidence of fundamental inadequacy. "So you learned that your value was conditional," Dr. Chen had said, "based on what you achieved, not who you were. And that creates anxiety, because you can never rest. You always have to be achieving, performing, proving." It was uncomfortable seeing the patterns laid out so clearly, but it was also liberating, because if the anxiety had roots, that meant it could be addressed at the root level, not just managed at the symptom level. On a Tuesday morning in mid-August, I got a text from my mum. "Dad and I are going to be in town this weekend. Can we take you and Sarah to dinner Saturday night?" I stared at the text for a long moment. My parents hadn't visited since last Christmas, and that visit had been tense. I'd been deep in my anxiety, barely able to function, unable to hide it from them. My mom had spent the whole time asking if I was okay, offering unsolicited advice, telling me I just needed to relax more. My dad had been quietly disapproving, as if my struggle was a failure of discipline or will. The old Marcus would have immediately started catastrophizing. What if they judge me? What if they see I'm still struggling? What if they're disappointed in who I've become? What if dinner is awkward? What if Sarah doesn't like them, or they don't like Sarah? But I'd been practicing. So instead I took a breath and typed, "That would be great. Looking forward to it." Then I called Sarah. "My parents want to take us to dinner this weekend. Is that okay?" "Of course," she said. "I'd love to meet them. You've told me so much about them." Fair warning, my relationship with them is complicated. They're good people, but they don't really understand the anxiety stuff, and they can be judgmental sometimes. "Marcus, they're your parents. They love you. And if they're important to you, they're important to me." Saturday evening, we met my parents at an Italian restaurant they'd chosen. Upscale, but not fancy. The kind of place where you can have a conversation without shouting over music. They were already there when Sarah and I arrived, sitting in a booth near the back. My mom stood up immediately and pulled me into a hug. "Marcus, you look good, really good, better than last time I saw you." My dad shook my hand. He'd never been a hugger, and smiled. "Son, good to see you." "Mom, Dad, this is Sarah." Sarah shook their hands with that warm, genuine smile of hers. "It's so nice to finally meet you both. Marcus talks about you all the time." We sat down, ordered drinks, made small talk about my parents' drive into the city, about the weather, about the restaurant. The conversation was pleasant but superficial, the way it always was with my parents. We were good at pleasant and superficial. But then my mom said, "So Marcus, tell us what's new with you. How's work?" I thought about how to answer. I could give them the sanitized version. "Work is great, got a promotion, everything's fine." Or I could be honest. I chose honest. "Work is actually really good. I got promoted to senior project manager in July. It's more responsibility, but it's going well. And I've been working on some personal stuff too. I started seeing a therapist a few months ago for anxiety. It's been really helpful." There was a pause. My parents exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that speaks volumes. "A therapist," my mom said carefully. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's okay. I mean, I've been struggling with anxiety for a while, worse than I realized, and I needed help learning how to manage it, so I'm getting that help." My dad cleared his throat. "And this therapist is helping?" "She is. A lot, actually." Another pause. Then my mom said, "Well, I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. That's important." It wasn't enthusiastic support, but it wasn't rejection either. For my parents, that was actually pretty good. Sarah, bless her, jumped in. "Marcus has been doing amazing work on himself. He's also started going back to church, which has been really meaningful for both of us." "Church?" My dad raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were done with all that." "I thought I was too," I admitted. "But I've been finding that faith helps with the anxiety. Not as a replacement for therapy, but as a complement to it. It's given me a different perspective on worry and control." My mum smiled, a real smile this time. "Your grandmother would be so happy to hear that. She prayed for you every day, you know. Even after she passed, I always think about how she'd want to know you'd found your way back to God." We talked more over dinner, about Sarah's job, about her dream of opening a bakery someday, about my parents' retirement plans, about the garden my mom was planting. The conversation wasn't perfect, but it was real. More real than our conversations had been in years. As we were finishing dessert, my dad said something that surprised me. "Marcus, I owe you an apology." I looked up. For what? When you were growing up, I think I put too much pressure on you. To be perfect, to never make mistakes, to always have the right answer. I thought I was preparing you for the world, teaching you to be excellent. But I think maybe I taught you that you weren't enough unless you were perfect. And I'm sorry for that. I felt my throat tighten. This was the most emotionally vulnerable I'd ever heard my father be. Dad, you were a good father. You and Mom gave me so much. We tried, he said, but nobody's perfect, not even parents. And I'm realizing that some of the things I thought were strengths, the high standards, the discipline, the focus on achievement, maybe they contributed to some of your struggles. It's okay, I said. I'm working through it. And honestly, a lot of it is just how I'm wired. It's not your fault. Still, he said, I want you to know that I'm proud of you, not because of your promotion or your achievements, but because you recognized you needed help and you sought it out. That takes courage, more courage than just powering through. When Sarah and I left the restaurant that night, I felt lighter, not because everything was resolved. My relationship with my parents was still complicated, still had layers to work through, but because we'd had an honest conversation, because my dad had apologized, because they'd accepted, even if they didn't fully understand, that I was on a journey toward healing. Your parents are lovely, Sarah said as we drove home. They're trying, I said. That's more than I expected. The next day at church, Pastor Mike started a new series called Transformed. The first message was about how change happens, not all at once, but gradually, through consistent small steps. You don't wake up one day completely different from who you were, he said. Transformation is a process. It's choosing the next right thing over and over, even when it's hard. It's falling down and getting back up. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But over time, those small choices add up to profound change. I thought about 3 months ago, unable to enter a grocery store, paralyzed by fear, convinced I'd always be broken. And I thought about now, leading a team at work, having honest conversations with my parents, planning a future with Sarah. Same person, but gradually becoming someone who could live with anxiety rather than being controlled by it. After the service, I stayed for the young adults group. We were studying a book about spiritual practices, and this week's topic was Sabbath, the practice of rest. Our culture worships productivity, Jennifer, the facilitator, said. We measure our worth by how much we accomplish, how busy we are, how much we're doing. But Sabbath says you are valuable simply because you exist. You don't have to earn your worth through achievement. You're allowed to rest. This hit me hard. I'd spent years proving my worth through work, through accomplishment, through never stopping. The idea that I could rest, that I was allowed to rest, that rest was actually holy, felt revolutionary. This week, Jennifer continued, I want to challenge each of you to practice a mini Sabbath. Pick one day or even just one evening where you don't work, don't check email, don't do anything productive. Just rest, be present, enjoy existence without achievement. That week, I decided Friday evening would be my Sabbath practice. No work email, no catching up on projects, no productivity, just rest. It was one of the hardest things I'd done. I got home from work at 6. Normally I'd make dinner while checking email on my phone, then spend the evening finishing up work tasks, planning for next week, getting ahead. But tonight, I left my laptop closed. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and I just existed. I made dinner slowly, actually tasting the food instead of eating while distracted. I read a book, not a business book, not something productive, just a novel I'd been meaning to read for pleasure. I called an old friend from college I hadn't talked to in months, and we spent an hour on the phone just catching up, laughing, reminiscing. Around 9, I sat on my apartment balcony with a cup of tea and just watched the city, the traffic below, the lights in other apartment windows, the movement of people living their lives. I didn't pray, didn't read scripture, didn't do anything spiritual. I just sat, and in that sitting, in that rest, I felt something I rarely allowed myself to feel. Peace. Not the peace that comes from accomplishing everything on your to-do list, not the peace that comes from having everything under control, but the deeper peace that comes from accepting that you don't have to prove anything, that you're allowed to simply be. Monday morning, Richard called me into his office. "Marcus, we need to talk about something." My anxiety immediately spiked. "We need to talk." Never good words. What had I done wrong? What had I missed? Was there a problem with one of my projects? But Richard was smiling. "Relax, it's good news. Margaret and I have been really impressed with how you've handled the transition to senior PM. The Westfield situation particularly, that could have gone badly, and you completely turned it around. So we want to give you a bigger challenge." "Okay," I said cautiously. "We're bidding on a major project with Titanfall Industries. It's the biggest potential contract we've ever pursued. 3 years, multi-million-dollar deal. If we win it, it would be transformational for the company, and we want you to lead the proposal team." My first thought was, I can't do this. It's too big. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not ready? My second thought was, while you worry, I am already acting. "I'm honored," I said, "and honestly, I'm nervous. This is bigger than anything I've done before, but I want to try." "That's exactly the attitude we're looking for," Richard said. "We're not expecting perfection. We're expecting your best effort, and we'll support you however we can." Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into the Titanfall proposal, but this time I did it differently. I didn't work alone, didn't try to control every detail, didn't obsess over perfection. Instead, I built a team. I delegated, I asked for help, I acknowledged what I didn't know and found people who did know. Tom handled the technical specifications. Jennifer worked on the visual design of the proposal. Carlos managed the client research. Amanda coordinated the timeline and budget projections, and I orchestrated it all, keeping everyone aligned, making sure we were telling a coherent story. It was collaborative in a way I'd never worked before, and it was better because of it. During this time, Sarah was working on her own big project, her business plan for the bakery. Most evenings, we'd sit together at my apartment or hers, both working on our respective dreams, occasionally sharing ideas or asking for feedback. "Listen to this," she'd say, reading from her draft. "The mission of Sarah's bakery is to create moments of joy through artisan baked goods made with love and the finest ingredients." Does that sound too cheesy? No, I'd say. It sounds like you. "Okay, your turn. Read me your executive summary for Titanfall." And I would, and she'd offer the perspective of someone outside the tech world, someone who understood storytelling and emotion and connection. We were building our futures together, separately but parallel, each supporting the other's journey. In therapy, Dr. Chen and I talked about this new phase. "You're not trying to eliminate anxiety anymore," she observed. "You're learning to live with it, to function despite it. That's significant progress." "It's still hard," I admitted. "There are days where it feels like I'm right back where I started, like I haven't made any progress at all. That's normal. Recovery isn't linear." "But Marcus, think about where you were 3 months ago. You couldn't enter a grocery store. Now you're leading the biggest proposal in your company's history. That's not nothing." She was right. I had come a long way. But the journey wasn't over. It might never be over. And I was learning that was okay. I didn't need to be fully healed to live a full life. I just needed to keep moving forward, one small choice at a time. On a Thursday night in late August, the Titanfall proposal was due. The team gathered in the conference room at 6 p.m. to do a final review. Everything was ready. The technical documentation, the budget, the timeline, the presentation materials. We'd done everything we could do. At 7:30, I submitted the proposal online. The system confirmed receipt, and then it was out of our hands. "So what happens now?" Jennifer asked. "Now we wait," I said. "They'll review all the proposals over the next 2 weeks, then invite finalists to present in person. We should know by mid-September if we made the cut." "And if we don't make it," Tom asked, "then we learn from it and move on to the next opportunity." I said it with a confidence I was still growing into, a confidence that said, I did my best. The outcome isn't entirely in my control, and whatever happens, I'll handle it. That weekend, Sarah and I went away for the first time in over a year. Just a simple overnight trip to the coast, nothing elaborate. We stayed in a small bed and breakfast, walked on the beach, ate fresh seafood, watched the sunset. On Saturday evening we sat on the beach as the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah said. "Always. I submitted my business loan application yesterday for the bakery. It's terrifying, but I did it." I turned to look at her. "Sarah, that's huge. How do you feel?" "Scared, excited, hopeful, all of it at once. I don't know if they'll approve it. I don't know if I'm ready, but I couldn't keep waiting for the perfect moment. Sometimes you just have to jump." "I'm so proud of you," I said. "We're both jumping, aren't we? You with Titanfall, me with the bakery. Both of us taking risks we wouldn't have taken 6 months ago." She was right. 6 months ago, we'd both been trapped by fear. Me by anxiety. Her by the safety of staying where she was. But something had shifted for both of us. We'd both learned that while we worried about whether we were ready, God was already preparing the way. As we watched the sun disappear into the ocean, Sarah said quietly, "Marcus, I love you. And I know we've talked about the future in abstract terms. But I want you to know, I'm all in. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you." I took her hand. "I'm all in too. I don't know exactly what our timeline looks like, but I know I want to build a life with you. Not someday, not eventually. Actually build it, starting now." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in the gathering darkness, two people who'd learned to face their fears, learning now what it meant to face the future together. "While you worry, I am already acting." 3 months ago, those words had broken through my paralysis in a parking lot. Now, they were becoming the foundation of how I lived. Not just about anxiety, but about everything. About work, about relationships, about dreams, about the unknown future that stretched out before me like the ocean before us. Vast, unpredictable, sometimes frightening, but full of possibility. I didn't have to have it all figured out. I didn't have to eliminate all risk. I didn't have to guarantee success before I tried. I just had to trust that while I worried about what might happen, God was already there, already working, already acting in ways I couldn't see. And somehow, that was enough. September came with the shift that happens when summer starts loosening its grip and autumn begins to whisper its arrival. The days were still warm, but the evenings had that crispness that made you reach for a light jacket. It had been 4 months since the parking lot, and I was learning that transformation doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It reveals itself in small moments when you suddenly realize you're handling things differently than you would have before. The call from Titanfall came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a team meeting when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally I wouldn't have answered, but something told me this was important. "Marcus Chen speaking." "Mr. Chen, this is Victoria Torres from Titanfall Industries. I'm calling regarding your proposal submission." My heart immediately started racing, but I kept my voice steady. "Yes, thank you for calling. I'm pleased to inform you that Data Stream Solutions has been selected as one of 3 finalists. We'd like to invite you to present your proposal in person to our executive team. Would you be available October 3rd? "Yes, absolutely. We'd be honored." "Excellent. I'll send you the details via email. We're looking forward to seeing what you have to offer." When I hung up, the entire team was looking at me expectantly. "We made the finals," I said, and the room erupted in cheers. Tom high-fived Jennifer. Carlos pumped his fist. Amanda was already pulling up her calendar to start planning, and I felt something I'd rarely let myself feel. Pride. Not the anxious, desperate need to prove myself, but genuine pride in the work we'd done together. Richard stopped by my office an hour later. "I heard the news. Congratulations, Marcus. This is huge for us." "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without the team." "I know, but you led them. That matters." He sat down in the chair across from my desk. "I want you to know something. When Margaret and I promoted you, we knew you were dealing with anxiety. We saw how hard you were working to manage it, and we took a chance on you anyway, because we believed you were capable of more than your anxiety let you believe about yourself. This proposal, making it to finals, this is you proving us right. After he left, I sat at my desk and let those words sink in. They'd known, they'd seen my struggle, and they'd believed in me anyway, not in spite of my anxiety, but alongside it. They'd seen the whole person, not just the broken parts. That evening at therapy, I told Dr. Chen about making the finals. "How do you feel about it?" she asked. "Excited, nervous, but also calm, like I know I'm going to be anxious before the presentation. I know the old patterns will try to show up, but I also know I can handle it. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. You're not fighting the anxiety anymore. You're acknowledging it and functioning anyway. That's the goal, not elimination, but management, not absence of fear, but courage despite fear." "I keep thinking about that night in the parking lot," I said, 4 months ago, when I couldn't even buy groceries. And now I'm presenting to Titanfall Industries. How is that even possible? It's possible because you did the work. You faced the fear, you got help, you practiced new skills, you changed your relationship with anxiety, and Marcus, you let God into the process. That spiritual component has been significant for you." She was right. The faith piece had been crucial, not as magical thinking that eliminated problems, but as a framework that helped me trust that I wasn't navigating life alone, that while I worried, God was acting. That Sunday at church, Pastor Mike's message was about Peter walking on water. The story where Peter steps out of the boat, walks toward Jesus, starts to sink when he gets scared, and Jesus catches him. Everyone focuses on Peter sinking, Pastor Mike said. But think about what happened before that. Peter actually walked on water. For a few steps, he did the impossible. And yes, he started to sink when fear took over, but even then Jesus was there to catch him. The lesson isn't that Peter failed. The lesson is that he tried. He got out of the boat when everyone else stayed safe, and when he started to sink, he wasn't abandoned. I thought about all the times I'd stayed in the boat, metaphorically speaking. All the opportunities I'd avoided, all the risks I'd refused to take, all the ways I'd let anxiety keep me safe but small. And I thought about the past 4 months, getting out of the boat over and over, sometimes walking, sometimes sinking, but always learning that I wouldn't be abandoned in the sinking. After the service, a man I'd seen around but never talked to approached me. He was probably in his 50s, dressed casually, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Marcus, right?" he said, extending his hand. "I'm Paul. I've heard you share a few times in the young adults group about your anxiety." "Yeah, that's me," I said, shaking his hand. "I wanted to thank you. I'm a therapist, been practicing for 25 years, and I lead a men's group here at the church on Tuesday evenings. It's for guys dealing with mental health stuff, anxiety, depression, whatever. We could use someone like you, someone who's willing to be honest about the struggle. Would you be interested in joining?" I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. A men's group, being vulnerable with strangers, sharing my story over and over, putting myself out there in ways that would have been unthinkable 4 months ago. But then I thought about Carol's prayer for me, about Jennifer's welcome, about the community that had formed around my honesty rather than my pretending. "Yeah," I said, "I'd like that." "Great. We meet at 7 on Tuesdays. I'll add you to the email list." That week, Sarah got news about her loan application. We were at her apartment, cooking dinner together. Well, she was cooking and I was attempting to help, when her phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and her face went pale. "It's the bank." "Answer it," I said. She stepped into the other room. I could hear her voice, but not the words. 2 minutes later, she came back and she was crying. "Sarah, what happened?" "They approved it. Marcus, they approved the loan. I'm going to open my bakery." I pulled her into a hug as she sobbed against my shoulder. Tears of joy, tears of relief, tears of fear, all mixed together. "I can't believe it's real," she said. "I've been dreaming about this for so long, and now it's actually happening. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if—" "Hey," I said gently, pulling back to look at her. What if it's amazing? What if you're exactly as good as you think you are? What if this is exactly what you're meant to do? She laughed through her tears. When did you become the optimistic one? I learned from the best, I said, kissing her forehead. You've been telling me to trust for months. Maybe it's my turn to remind you. Over the next few weeks, our lives became a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah was looking at potential locations for the bakery, working with contractors, designing the space, testing recipes, creating a brand. I was preparing for the Titanfall presentation, coordinating with my team, rehearsing, but not obsessively, just appropriately. I started attending Paul's men's group on Tuesday evenings. There were 8 of us, men ranging from late 20s to early 60s, all dealing with some form of mental health challenge. Some had anxiety like me. Others dealt with depression. One guy was recovering from a suicide attempt. Another was working through PTSD from military service. The first night, Paul asked us to go around and share why we were there. When it was my turn, I told them about the parking lot, about the prayer, about the words that had changed everything, about 4 months of slowly learning to live differently. The thing is, I said, I thought I had to fix myself before I could be useful to anyone. I thought I had to eliminate all my problems before I deserved to be in community, to be in relationship, to contribute anything meaningful. But what I'm learning is that's backwards. Community is where healing happens. Vulnerability is where strength is found, and God doesn't wait for us to be perfect before He uses us. After the meeting, several guys came up to thank me for sharing. One guy named Derek, probably late 30s, said, "Man, that parking lot story. I've been there. Different parking lot, same paralysis. It helps to know I'm not the only one." "You're definitely not the only one," I said. As October approached, the anxiety about the Titanfall presentation started to build. Not the paralyzing, all-consuming anxiety of before, but a steady hum of nervousness. I'd wake up at night sometimes, my mind racing through the presentation, imagining questions they might ask, scenarios that might go wrong. But now, I had tools. I'd use the worry window technique, acknowledging the anxiety, but containing it. I'd pray, not desperate parking lot prayers, but honest conversations with God about my fears. I'd talk to Dr. Chen about strategies. I'd share with Sarah, with the men's group, with Pastor Mike after church. I wasn't handling it alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The week before the presentation, my dad called. We'd been talking more regularly since the dinner in August, usually just brief check-ins, but this felt different. "Marcus, your mother and I have been talking. We'd like to come to your presentation, to support you." I was surprised. "Dad, it's a business presentation. It's probably going to be pretty boring for people who aren't in tech." "We don't care if it's boring. We want to be there, if you're okay with that." I thought about it. Having my parents there would add another layer of pressure, another thing to worry about. But it would also mean something. It would mean they were showing up for me in a way they hadn't before. "Okay," I said. "I'd like that. We're proud of you, son." I know I don't say it enough, but we are. October 3rd arrived with clear skies and cool temperatures. The presentation was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon at Titanfall's headquarters, an hour outside the city. Richard, Tom, Jennifer and I drove together in Richard's car. My parents were driving separately and would meet us there. In the car, I felt surprisingly calm. Not because I wasn't nervous. I definitely was, but because I knew I'd done everything I could do. We had a solid proposal. We'd practiced the presentation. We knew our material. And whatever happened next was beyond my control. While you worry, I am already acting. We arrived at Titanfall's building, a modern glass structure that screamed success and innovation. My parents were waiting in the parking lot. My mom gave me a hug. My dad shook my hand and said, "You've got this." Inside, we were ushered into a large conference room. Victoria Torres greeted us professionally, then introduced us to the Titanfall executive team, 5 people who would decide our fate: the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, the VP of Operations, and the Head of Innovation. I looked at their faces, experienced, skeptical, waiting to be impressed. 4 months ago, this moment would have destroyed me. But today, I took a breath, smiled, and began. Thank you for having us here today. At Data Stream Solutions, we believe that the best partnerships aren't built on who has the flashiest presentation or the lowest price. They're built on trust, capability, and shared vision. Today, we want to show you why we're the right partner for what Titanfall is trying to build. And for the next 90 minutes, we presented. I led the overall narrative. Tom covered the technical implementation. Jennifer showcased the design approach. Richard spoke to our company's track record and commitment. We moved through it like a well-rehearsed dance, each person contributing their part, the whole greater than the sum of its parts. They asked hard questions. They pushed back on some of our assumptions. They challenged our timeline and our budget. But we had answers. Good answers. Honest answers. And when we didn't know something, we admitted it and explained how we'd find out. At 3:30, we finished. The CEO, a woman named Diana Chen, no relation, stood up. Thank you for a thorough and impressive presentation. We'll be making our decision within 2 weeks, and we'll notify all finalists at that time. We appreciate your time and effort. We shook hands all around, thanked them for the opportunity, and left. In the parking lot, my parents approached. Marcus, my mom said, her eyes bright. That was incredible. I had no idea what you did, really. But watching you in there, you were commanding, confident, professional. I was so impressed. You were excellent, son, my dad added. Really excellent. Richard and the team headed back to the car, giving me a moment with my parents. Thanks for coming, I said. It means a lot that you were here. We wouldn't have missed it, my mom said. And Marcus, regardless of whether you win this contract or not, we're proud of you. The person you've become, the work you've done on yourself, that matters more than any business deal. As I drove back to the city with Richard and my team, I felt something settling in my chest. Peace. Not the peace of knowing we'd won. We wouldn't know that for 2 weeks. But the peace of knowing I'd shown up fully, done my best, and trusted the outcome to forces beyond my control. That evening, Sarah and I celebrated with pizza and cheap wine on my apartment balcony. How do you feel? She asked. Good. Really good. We might not win, but I showed up. I led my team well. I didn't let anxiety sabotage the moment. That's a victory regardless of what Titanfall decides. Look at you, Sarah said, smiling. 4 months ago, you couldn't walk into a grocery store. Today, you presented to corporate executives with your parents watching. Do you see how far you've come? I did see it. Not perfectly, not completely. There were still hard days. There were still moments when the anxiety felt overwhelming. But I was different. Fundamentally, deeply different. While you worry, I'm already acting, I said quietly. What? That's what God told me. In the parking lot, 4 months ago. While you worry, I am already acting. And He has been. In ways I couldn't have imagined. Not just with work, but with you. With my faith, with my family, with learning to be human in a healthier way. Sarah took my hand. I have something to tell you. I looked at her. There was something in her voice, nervous but excited. I found a location for the bakery. It's perfect. Good neighborhood, reasonable rent, the right size. I'm signing the lease next week. This is really happening, Marcus. That's amazing. I pulled her into a hug. And I've been thinking, she continued, pulling back to look at me. We've been talking about the future in abstract terms, but I don't want it to be abstract anymore. I want it to be real. I want to build a life with you, not someday, but now. What do you think about moving in together? My first instinct was to catastrophize. What if it's too soon? What if we're not ready? What if it ruins what we have? But I caught myself. I recognized the anxiety for what it was, fear dressed up as wisdom. I think, I said slowly, that I love you, that you've stood by me through the hardest period of my life, that I want to wake up next to you every morning, that I'm tired of saying goodbye at the end of every evening. So yes, let's do it. Let's move in together. She kissed me then, and in that kiss was all the hope and fear and possibility of the future we were building together. 2 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon, Victoria Torres called. "Mr. Chen, I'm pleased to inform you that Titanfall Industries has selected Data Stream Solutions for the partnership. Congratulations." I'd won. We'd won. The biggest contract in our company's history. But as I hung up the phone and processed the news, I realized something important. Winning felt good, but it wasn't what had changed my life. The transformation had already happened. In a parking lot 4 months ago, in a therapist's office, in a church pew, in honest conversations, in small daily choices to face fear rather than run from it. The contract was a result of that transformation, not the cause of it. While I'd been worrying about whether I was ready, God had been preparing me. While I'd been anxious about the outcome, He'd already been acting. And He would continue to act in ways I couldn't yet imagine, preparing me for whatever came next. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of learning to live it. November brought rain and the kind of grey skies that make you grateful for warm coffee and indoor spaces. Sarah and I had been living together for 3 weeks, and we were still in that adjustment phase where you're learning each other's rhythms. Who's a morning person? Who leaves dishes in the sink? Who needs alone time? And who needs conversation after a long day? It was messier than I'd imagined, but also better. Messier because life with another person means compromise and communication and working through the little conflicts that arise when two independent people try to build a shared life. Better because I got to wake up next to her every morning, because the apartment felt like home, in a way it never had when I lived alone. Because love in daily proximity is different from love at a distance. The Titanfall contract was moving forward. We'd signed the agreement in late October, and now we were in the implementation phase, the less glamorous but critically important work of actually delivering on what we'd promised. I was managing a team of 12 people, coordinating with Titanfall's team, navigating challenges and setbacks, and the inevitable friction that comes with large-scale projects. It was stressful. There were days when the anxiety would spike, when I'd feel that familiar tightness in my chest, when the old patterns of catastrophic thinking would try to reassert themselves. But I had tools now. I had community. I had faith. And I was learning that setbacks weren't evidence of failure. They were just part of the process. One afternoon in mid-November, I got a call from Tom. "Marcus, we have a problem with the Titanfall project. A significant problem." My heart rate immediately increased. "What kind of problem?" "The integration module we designed. It's not working with their existing systems. We tested it extensively, but their infrastructure is more complex than they initially disclosed. We're looking at potentially weeks of additional work to fix it." This was exactly the kind of situation that would have sent old Marcus into a complete meltdown. Weeks of delay, potential budget overruns, a major client disappointed, evidence that I'd failed, that I wasn't good enough, that I'd let everyone down. But I took a breath. "Okay, let's not panic. Can you pull together everyone who's working on this and meet in conference room B in 20 minutes? We'll figure this out." 20 minutes later, the team was assembled. Tom, Amanda, 3 developers, 2 systems architects. Everyone looked stressed. "All right," I said. "Here's what I know. We have a problem with the integration module. It's significant, but not catastrophic. And we're going to solve it together. Tom, walk us through exactly what's happening." Tom explained the technical details. The integration wasn't communicating properly with Titanfall's legacy systems. It would require substantial reworking of the code architecture. "How long will it take to fix?" I asked. 3 weeks minimum, maybe 4. "And what's the impact on the overall timeline?" "We'll miss our December 15th deadline. Probably push into January." I looked around the room. Everyone was waiting for me to react, to panic, to blame, to make it worse. Instead, I said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, this isn't anyone's fault. We tested based on the information we had. The client didn't fully disclose the complexity of their systems. That's not on us. Second, we're going to be honest with Titanfall immediately. I'll call Victoria this afternoon and explain the situation and our plan to fix it. Third, we're going to work together to solve this. I'm not expecting anyone to work 80-hour weeks or sacrifice their lives. We'll do this sustainably. Amanda, can you work out a revised timeline that's realistic? Yeah, I can have that by tomorrow morning. Good. And everyone else, just keep doing excellent work. We'll get through this. After the meeting, I went back to my office and did something that would have been impossible 5 months ago. I called Victoria Torres at Titanfall and told her the truth. Victoria, I need to make you aware of a challenge we've encountered with the integration module. We've discovered that your existing infrastructure is more complex than initially disclosed, and it's going to require additional time to ensure the integration works properly. We're looking at a 3 to 4 week delay. There was silence on the other end. Then, how did this happen? Didn't you test this? We did extensive testing based on the documentation your team provided. But there were complexities in your legacy systems that weren't apparent until we began the actual integration. It's nobody's fault. It's just a reality of working with complex technical systems. So what's your plan to fix it? My team is working on a revised timeline right now. We'll have that to you by tomorrow morning. And I want to assure you, we're committed to delivering quality work. I'd rather take a few extra weeks to get it right than rush something that doesn't meet our standards or yours. Another pause. Then Victoria said something I didn't expect. I appreciate your honesty, Marcus. A lot of vendors would have tried to hide this or blame us. The fact that you're being upfront about it and taking ownership of the solution, that actually makes me more confident in our partnership, not less. When I hung up, I sat back in my chair and marveled. A major setback, handled with honesty and calm, had actually strengthened the client relationship. Who would have thought? That evening at home, I told Sarah about the situation. How are you feeling about it? She asked. We were cooking dinner together, pasta with marinara sauce, nothing fancy but comforting. Surprisingly okay, I said. I mean, I'm not thrilled that we have a delay, but I'm not spiraling. I'm not convinced it's the end of the world. It's just a problem that needs solving. That's huge, Marcus. 5 months ago, something like this would have destroyed you. I know. It's weird how different things feel now. Not perfect, I still get anxious. But it doesn't control me the way it used to. I'm proud of you, she said, kissing my cheek. And speaking of things that would have terrified you 5 months ago, I need your opinion on something. She pulled out her phone and showed me design mock-ups for the bakery, logo options, color schemes, menu layouts. Her graphic designer friend had put together several options. These are beautiful, I said. When does construction start? Next week. If everything stays on schedule, I should be able to open in January. January, Marcus. 3 months from now, I'll have my own bakery. I could see the mixture of excitement and terror in her eyes, the same mixture I felt about the Titanfall project, about living together, about the future we were building. You're going to be amazing, I said. That Sunday, Pastor Mike's message was about Joseph, the biblical Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and imprisoned, but eventually became second in command in Egypt and saved his family from famine. Joseph had every reason to be bitter, Pastor Mike said, every reason to give up on God. But at the end of his story, he tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Joseph could see, looking back, that even in the worst moments of his life, God was working toward purposes Joseph couldn't see at the time. I thought about that parking lot 5 months ago. At the time, it had felt like rock bottom, like proof of my failure, like the worst moment of my life. But now I could see that it was actually the turning point, the moment when I finally stopped trying to control everything and started learning to trust. God had used my worst moment to begin my transformation. We don't always see God's purposes in real time, Pastor Mike continued. Sometimes we only understand them in hindsight. But faith means trusting that even when we can't see what God is doing, He's still working, even in the setbacks, even in the delays, even in the suffering. He's acting, even while we worry. After the service, Paul from the men's group pulled me aside. "Marcus, I wanted to ask you something. Would you be willing to share your story at one of our church's midweek services about the parking lot, the anxiety, the journey of healing? I think it would encourage a lot of people. My immediate reaction was panic. Speaking in front of the entire church, being that vulnerable in front of hundreds of people, putting my story out there for everyone to judge. But then I thought about all the people who'd shared their stories with me, at the men's group, at the young adults gathering in one-on-one conversations. Their vulnerability had given me permission to be vulnerable. Their honesty had helped me be honest. Maybe my story could do that for someone else. Yeah, I said, I'll do it. Great. How about December 6th? That's 4 weeks away. Gives you time to prepare. 4 weeks to prepare to be more vulnerable than I'd ever been. No pressure. In therapy that week, I told Dr. Chen about agreeing to share my story publicly. How do you feel about that decision? She asked. Terrified. What if people judge me? What if they think I'm weak? What if sharing my story somehow makes the anxiety come back worse? Those are all understandable fears. But let me ask you something. What's the worst realistic outcome of sharing your story? I thought about it. I guess some people might not understand. Some people might think less of me. And how would you handle that? I'd be disappointed. But it wouldn't change the truth of my experience. And hopefully some people would understand, would benefit from hearing it. Exactly. And Marcus, you've already been practicing vulnerability for months now. With Sarah, with your colleagues, with your therapy group, with the men's group. This is just a larger scale version of what you've already been doing. She was right. Vulnerability had become a practice, something I'd been training in. This was just the next level. Over the next few weeks, I worked on what I would share. Not a scripted speech. I'd learned that trying to control every word just made me more anxious. Instead, I outlined the key points. The parking lot, the prayer, the words I heard, the journey of the past 5 months, the setbacks and the victories, the ongoing nature of healing. Meanwhile, life continued its messy, beautiful forward motion. The Titanfall project moved through its delays and adjustments. Sarah's bakery construction progressed, slowly, with inevitable contractor issues and permit delays, but progressing. We settled into living together, finding our rhythm, learning the dance of shared space. Thanksgiving arrived, and Sarah and I hosted dinner at our apartment for the first time. My parents came, along with Sarah's parents, who drove up from their home 2 hours south. It was chaotic, too many people in too small a space, the turkey slightly overcooked, the mashed potatoes lumpy. But it was also perfect, because it was real, messy and imperfect and full of love. During dinner, my dad stood up with his wine glass. I'd like to make a toast to Marcus and Sarah for opening their home to us, and to Marcus specifically. Son, watching you this past year has been remarkable. You faced something really difficult, and instead of hiding from it, you confronted it. You got help, you grew, and I want you to know that I'm more proud of that than any promotion or contract. Here's to courage and honesty and doing the hard work of becoming whole. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt tears prickling at my eyes. My dad, who'd always valued strength and discipline above all else, was praising me for vulnerability and asking for help. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Sarah's mum pulled me aside. Marcus, I want to thank you for loving my daughter so well. I can see how happy she is with you, how supported she feels. That means everything to a mother. She's done the same for me, I said. I wouldn't be where I am without her. I know. That's how the best relationships work. You make each other better. The following week, I attended my last session with Dr. Chen, not because I was cured or because I didn't need therapy anymore, but because we'd reached a natural transition point. We'd been working together for 6 months, and she felt I had the tools I needed to continue my healing journey independently. You can always come back if you need to, she said. But Marcus, you've done incredible work. You came in, barely able to function, and now you're managing a major project, living with your partner, speaking publicly about your experience. That's not nothing. I couldn't have done it without you, I said. You gave me tools when I had none. You helped me see patterns I couldn't see. Thank you. You did the work. I just guided it. And remember, healing isn't linear. There will still be hard days. The difference is, now you know how to handle them. December 6th arrived faster than I expected. The midweek service, where I'd agreed to share my story. Sarah came with me for moral support, along with several people from the men's group. When Pastor Mike introduced me, I walked up to the microphone with my heart pounding. There were maybe 200 people in the room, 200 people about to hear about my worst moment. I took a breath, and I began. 5 months ago, I sat in a parking lot for 45 minutes, unable to walk into a grocery store. I was 32 years old, had a good job, a wonderful girlfriend, everything that should have made me happy. But I was drowning in anxiety that had taken over my life. That night, in that parking lot, I was at the end of myself. So I prayed. Not a fancy prayer, just desperate honesty. And I felt God speak to me, not with words I could hear, but with truth I could feel. While you worry, I am already acting. I told them about the therapy, about the church, about learning to trust, about the setbacks and small victories. I told them about the Titanfall presentation and the recent project delays. I told them about moving in with Sarah and hosting Thanksgiving. I told them the truth, that I wasn't completely healed, that I still struggled, but that I was learning to live with anxiety rather than being controlled by it. I'm sharing this because I know I'm not the only one, I said. I know there are people in this room right now who are struggling with anxiety, depression, or something else they feel they have to hide. And I want you to know you're not alone. Getting help isn't weakness, it's courage. Being vulnerable isn't failure, it's strength. And God doesn't wait for you to be perfect before He starts working in your life. While you worry, He's already acting. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then people started clapping, and several people were crying. Afterward, at least a dozen people came up to me. Some thanked me for sharing. Others told me their own stories of struggle. One woman said she'd been thinking about ending her life, but hearing my story made her realize she should get help instead. That night, lying in bed next to Sarah, I felt something I'd rarely felt, a sense that my pain had purpose, that the worst period of my life had given me something valuable to offer others. Hope that change was possible, evidence that healing could happen, permission to be honest about the struggle. You were incredible tonight, Sarah whispered in the darkness. I was terrified, I admitted. I know, but you did it anyway. That's what courage looks like. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the journey from that parking lot to this moment. 5 months. Not a long time in the scope of a lifetime, but long enough to prove that transformation was real. That while I'd been worrying about whether I could change, God had already been changing me. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. But it was happening, and that was enough. December arrived with cold winds and the kind of darkness that comes when the days grow short. 6 months since the parking lot, half a year of transformation that felt both like a lifetime and like yesterday. The week after sharing my story at church, I received over 30 emails and messages from people. Some I knew, many I didn't. Each one told a story of struggle, anxiety, depression, addiction, grief, trauma. Each one thanked me for being honest, for giving them hope, for showing them that healing was possible. One email in particular stood out. It was from a man named Robert, probably in his 50s. Marcus, I heard you speak last Wednesday. I've been struggling with anxiety for 20 years. 20 years of hiding it, managing it alone, convincing everyone, including myself, that I was fine. Your story was the first time I've heard someone describe exactly what I experience. Yesterday, I called a therapist. I have my first appointment next week. Thank you for having the courage to be vulnerable. It gave me courage too. I read that email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. My pain, my struggle, my worst moments, they weren't wasted. They'd become something that could help someone else. At work, the Titanfall project continued moving forward. We'd worked through the integration issues, rebuilt trust with the client. Victoria Torres called one afternoon. Marcus, our CEO Diana, wants to discuss expanding our partnership beyond the current contract. She's impressed with how your team has handled the challenges. She sees DataStream as a long-term strategic partner, not just a vendor. 6 months ago, I couldn't buy groceries. Now I was being asked to expand the biggest contract in company history. That evening, Sarah came home from the bakery site. Construction was nearly complete. The ovens installed, the display cases in, the walls painted in warm, inviting colors. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks until the soft opening. Marcus, this is actually happening. How are you feeling? Terrified? What if nobody comes? What if my baking isn't good enough? I pulled her into a hug. Remember what you told me when I was spiraling about Titanfall? That while we worry, God is already acting. That applies to you too. She laughed. It's annoying when you use my own advice against me. That Sunday, Pastor Mike's sermon was about Mary, the mother of Jesus. Think about Mary, he said. An angel tells her she's going to have God's baby. But then she had to tell Joseph, who almost left her. She endured gossip and judgment. She traveled while 9 months pregnant. She gave birth in a stable. Nothing about the actual experience was ideal, but God was acting. Even in the stable, even in the hardship, the entire salvation story was unfolding, and from Mary's perspective, it probably just felt like a series of difficult circumstances. I thought about my own story. The parking lot had felt like failure. The anxiety had felt like weakness, but God had been working through all of it, using my brokenness to teach me trust, using my struggle to give me empathy for others. After the service, Paul approached me with a younger guy, maybe mid-20s, who looked nervous. Marcus, this is Daniel. He heard you speak last week and wanted to meet you. Daniel shook my hand tentatively. I've been dealing with really bad anxiety. Like can't leave my apartment most days bad. Your story gave me hope. I spent 20 minutes with Daniel, sharing resources, giving him Dr. Chen's information, inviting him to the men's group. My healing wasn't just for me. It was creating pathways for others to find their own healing. The call with Titanfall's CEO went well. They wanted to expand the partnership, add more projects. Richard was ecstatic. Margaret pulled me aside. You know we're going to recommend you for VP of Client Services when James retires next year, right? VP, a position I never would have imagined 6 months ago. Sarah's soft opening happened on December 22nd. Just friends and family, a test run before the grand opening. I watched her serve pastries she'd made with her own hands, watched her light up when people raved about her croissants, watched her dream become reality. That night, back at our apartment, I pulled out a small box I'd been hiding for 2 weeks. Sarah, I know this has been a year of huge changes for both of us. We've both faced our fears, taken risks, grown in ways we couldn't have imagined. And through all of it, you've been my anchor, my encouragement, my partner. I can't imagine facing the future without you. I got down on one knee, and her hands flew to her mouth. Will you marry me? She was crying, nodding, saying yes before I'd even finished the question. I slipped the ring on her finger, and we held each other. 2 people who'd learned to face their fears together, ready to build a life together. Christmas came quietly. We spent it with both our families, sharing the news of our engagement, celebrating the transformations we'd both experienced. My dad pulled me aside. Son, a year ago, I was worried about you, really worried. You seem to be barely holding on. But look at you now. Look at what you've built, the career, the relationship, the life. I'm not just proud of what you've accomplished. I'm proud of who you've become. As the year drew to a close, I reflected on everything that had changed since that night in the parking lot. The job I'd been afraid I'd lose had become a promotion. The relationship I'd thought I was ruining had become an engagement. The faith I'd abandoned had become the foundation of my healing. The anxiety that had controlled me had become something I was learning to manage. None of it was perfect. I still had hard days. I still struggled sometimes, but I was different. Fundamentally, deeply different. On New Year's Eve, Sarah and I drove to that grocery store parking lot, the same one where it had all begun. "Why are we here?" she asked. "I need to see it." I need to remember where I started. We sat in the car, looking at the store entrance, the same automatic doors, the same fluorescent lights. 6 months ago, I sat right here, unable to move, I said. Unable to do the simplest task, convinced I was broken beyond repair, and God met me here, in this ordinary parking lot, in my worst moment, and he told me, "While you worry, I am already acting." And he was, Sarah said softly. He was. He was preparing the promotion. He was strengthening our relationship. He was building a community I didn't know I needed. He was writing a story I couldn't see yet. While I worried, he was acting. As we drove away from that parking lot, I felt profound gratitude, not just for where I was going, but for where I'd been, for the parking lot that had become holy ground, for the prayer that had changed everything. The anxiety would always be part of my story, but it would no longer be the author of my story. God was writing something new, something where fear didn't have the final word, where struggle had purpose, where transformation was possible. And that story was just beginning. 1 year, 365 days since that night in the parking lot, when God spoke words that would reshape my entire life. While you worry, I'm already acting. I'm standing in that same parking lot now, but everything is different. I'm not here because I'm paralyzed by anxiety. I'm here because I'm meeting someone, Daniel, the young man I met at church, who's been on his own journey of healing for the past 6 months. He asked if we could meet here, at the place where my transformation began, because he wanted to see it for himself. His car pulls up next to mine, and he gets out, looking healthier, more confident than when we first met. We shake hands. Then he looks at the grocery store entrance. "This is where it happened?" he asks. "This is where it happened. Right in this spot. I couldn't even walk through those doors. I thought my life was over. I thought I'd always be broken. And now?" I smile. "Now I know that broken is just another word for being remade." We walk into the store together, the same store I couldn't enter a year ago, and grab coffee from the Starbucks inside. As we sit at a small table, Daniel tells me about his progress. He's started therapy. He's on medication that's helping. He's been attending the men's group regularly. He got a new job after being unemployed for 8 months. Small victories that add up to transformation. "Your story saved my life," he says quietly. "When I heard you speak at church, I was 2 days away from ending everything. I thought there was no hope for me. But you showed me that healing was possible, that I wasn't alone, that God hadn't abandoned me." I feel tears prickling at my eyes. "Daniel, I'm just grateful God used my mess to help someone else." That's what he does. He redeems our pain, turns it into something that can heal others. After Daniel leaves, I drive to DataStream Solutions. It's Saturday, but I have a few things to wrap up before Sarah's grand opening tomorrow. The bakery is finally officially opening to the public after weeks of soft openings and preparation. At the office, I run into Richard in the parking lot. "Marcus, what are you doing here on a Saturday?" "Just tying up a few loose ends before taking next week off for Sarah's opening." "How does it feel, VP of Client Services?" The promotion had become official 2 weeks ago. VP, a title I never would have dreamed possible a year ago. Surreal, I admit, in the best way. You've earned it, not just because of Titanfall, though that was huge, but because of how you've grown as a leader. The way you handle challenges, the way you support your team, the honesty you bring to everything, that's what leadership looks like. That evening, Sarah and I have dinner with both sets of parents, a pre-celebration before tomorrow's big day. We're at the same Italian restaurant where I'd been vulnerable with my parents 18 months ago, where my dad had apologized for the pressure he'd put on me. "Tomorrow's the day," Sarah's mum says, raising her glass. To Sarah, who had a dream and made it real, "We're so proud of you, honey." We toast, and I watch Sarah, my fiancée, soon to be my wife, glow with pride and nervous excitement. "And to Marcus," my dad adds, "who showed us all what courage really looks like. Not the absence of fear, but facing it anyway. We're proud of both of you." After dinner, Sarah and I drive to the bakery. It's dark inside, but we unlock the door and turn on the lights. The space is beautiful. Warm wood, soft lighting, display cases ready to be filled with pastries, small tables where people can sit and enjoy their coffee and food. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" I ask. "Terrified," she admits. "What if nobody comes? What if they hate everything?" "They won't, but even if some people don't love it, you've built something real. You've created something from nothing. You've turned your dream into a physical space. That's incredible, regardless of how tomorrow goes." She takes my hand. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best teacher, anxiety. It taught me that worry doesn't prevent bad things from happening. It just prevents you from enjoying the good things while they're happening." The next morning, I wake up early and go for a run, something I've started doing regularly, a practice that helps manage the anxiety that still shows up sometimes. As I run through the neighborhood, I think about this past year, the parking lot, the therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, the church services, the men's group, the Titanfall presentation, the promotion, the engagement. Each moment a thread in a larger tapestry I couldn't see while I was living it. Sarah's grand opening starts at 9. By 8:30, there's already a line outside the door. Friends from church, people from the neighborhood, curious customers who'd seen the signs and social media posts. I watch Sarah unlock the door, welcome people in, serve them the pastries she'd spent years dreaming about making. I watch her face light up as people rave about her croissants, her scones, her cinnamon rolls. I watch her dream become reality. Around noon, when things have calmed down a bit, she comes over to where I'm sitting at one of the tables. "This is really happening," she says, tears in her eyes. "People love it, Marcus. They really love it. I told you they would. A year ago, this was just a dream. I was scared to even try. But watching you face your fears, get help, transform your life, it gave me courage to do the same." That afternoon, I drive to Grace Community Church. There's a special service happening, a baptism service, and Daniel, the young man I met 6 months ago, is getting baptized. I sit in the audience with Sarah as Daniel shares his testimony. He talks about the depression, the suicidal thoughts, the despair, and then he talks about hearing my story, about finding hope, about discovering that God hadn't abandoned him. "Someone once told me that while we worry, God is already acting," Daniel says from the baptismal. "And that's been true in my life. While I was convinced there was no hope, God was already preparing people to help me, circumstances to change me, a future I couldn't imagine. I'm not completely healed. I still struggle. But I'm alive, I'm healing, and I'm learning to trust that God is working even when I can't see it." As Pastor Mike baptizes Daniel, I feel Sarah squeeze my hand. We're both crying, tears of joy, of gratitude, of witnessing the redemption of pain. That evening, Sarah and I return to the parking lot one final time. We sit in my car, looking at the grocery store entrance, remembering. "Thank you," I say quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for loving me through the worst of it, for showing me that I was worth fighting for." "You've always been worth fighting for, Marcus. You just needed to believe it yourself." I turn to look at her. "I'm going to tell you something I haven't told anyone. That night, in this parking lot, when I prayed, I didn't think God would answer. I thought I was talking to myself. I thought it was hopeless. But I was wrong. God was already acting. He was already preparing everything that's happened this year. The healing, the career, you, all of it. While you worried, he was acting," Sarah says softly. "Exactly." We sit in comfortable silence, watching the evening shoppers come and go from the store. A young mother with 2 children, an elderly man walking slowly with a cane, a teenage couple holding hands, all of them moving through their own stories, facing their own struggles, living their own journeys. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah says. "I'm glad you had that breakdown in this parking lot." I look at her surprised. "I know that sounds terrible," she continues, "but if you hadn't hit rock bottom, you might never have gotten help. You might have kept struggling in silence, kept trying to manage everything alone. That parking lot moment, as awful as it was the beginning of your healing. It was the moment you finally admitted you needed help. She's right. The worst moment of my life had been the doorway to the best year of my life. So what now? I ask. We've both achieved our dreams, the career, the bakery, we're engaged. We have community, faith, health. What's next? Sarah smiles. Now we live. Not perfectly, not without struggles, but fully, honestly, together, trusting that while we worry about the future, God is already there, already acting, already preparing what we need. As we drive away from that parking lot for what I know will be the last time, I think about the message God gave me a year ago. While you worry, I'm already acting. Those 7 words had changed everything. They taught me that my worth wasn't dependent on my performance, that vulnerability was strength, not weakness, that healing was possible, even when it felt impossible, that community was essential, not optional, that faith wasn't about having all the answers, it was about trusting despite not having answers, that God was working even in my darkest moments, even when I couldn't see it, even when I couldn't feel it. The anxiety hadn't disappeared completely. Some days were still hard. Some nights I still lay awake with racing thoughts. Some situations still triggered that old familiar tightness in my chest. But I'd learned to live with it, to acknowledge it without letting it control me, to use the tools I'd developed, therapy techniques, prayer, community, honest conversations, rest, boundaries, to remember that anxiety was something I experienced, not who I was. 6 months from now, Sarah and I will get married. A year from now, her bakery will be thriving and we'll be talking about opening a second location. 2 years from now, we'll be expecting our first child. 5 years from now, I'll be leading a church ministry for people struggling with mental health, using my story to bring hope to others. But I don't know any of that yet. I'm just living in this moment, this day, this season of my life, trusting that while I worry about tomorrow, God is already there, already acting, already preparing what I need. Because that's what He does, that's who He is. While we worry, He acts. While we panic, He provides. While we fear, He prepares. While we doubt, He works. My name is Marcus. And a year ago, God met me in a parking lot and spoke words that changed my life. While you worry, I am already acting. And I'm telling you this story because I know I'm not the only one. I know there are people reading this right now who are sitting in their own parking lots, literally or metaphorically, unable to move, convinced they're broken beyond repair, certain that their anxiety has won. And I want you to know you're not alone. Healing is possible. Help is available. God hasn't abandoned you. While you worry about whether things will ever get better, He is already acting in ways you can't yet see. Your parking lot moment doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of your transformation. Trust the process. Get help. Be vulnerable. Build community. Have faith. And remember, while you worry, God is already acting. He always has been. He always will be.